I don't really know why I'm recording this. Maybe because it felt too real to just forget. And I've been sitting at my desk for the past hour trying to convince myself it was just a dream. Of course it was just a dream. I'm going to keep telling myself that until it sticks. It started the way a lot of dreams do, I guess. Mid-action, no preamble. 1 second I wasn't anywhere, and then I was. I was lying on a floor, concrete and cold. The kind of cold that soaks through your clothes before you even realize it's happening. I sat up and looked around, and that's when the first wave hit me. That uncomfortable feeling. I don't have a better word for it than buzzing. Not in my ears, not in my chest, deeper than that. Like something had reached inside me and plucked at whatever's underneath all the meat and bone, and the vibration just wouldn't die out. I kept waiting for it to fade, the way discomfort usually does when you get used to it, but it never did. I sat there the entire time, humming away in the depths of my consciousness. The room was small, maybe 12 feet across, slightly longer than wide, though the corners were uneven, like it had been built by someone who didn't care much for precision. The walls were concrete too, same as the floor, and the mold on them was bad, dark green in some places, black in others. These wide, blotchy patches spreading out from the corners. The ceiling was low enough that when I stood, I could press my palm flat against it without fully extending my arm. No windows, no doors, no seams that looked like they could be doors. No light fixtures either, and yet I could see everything clearly, which I didn't even register as strange until later. In a dream, you tend not to question that kind of thing right away. The only feature in the entire room, if you could call it a feature, was a hole in the wall. Circular, roughly 6 inches across, sitting at about chest height. I didn't go near it at first. I spent what felt like a long time just pacing the room, pressing on the walls, knocking on them, getting down on my hands and knees to look at the floor for any kind of seam or hatch. Nothing. At some point, I realized, the way you sometimes just know things in a dream, that I wasn't going to find anything. There was nothing to find. This was the room, and the room was it. I knew I was dreaming. I figured out maybe an hour in, or at least what felt like an hour, and thought that would help, the way it usually does. Like, once you recognize it, you can sort of loosen your grip on the dream and wake yourself up, or at least stop taking it seriously. But knowing didn't do anything. The buzzing was still there. The mold was still there. The cold was still seeping through the floor into my feet. I pinched myself, and all it did was hurt. The room didn't care that I knew it was a dream. Eventually, I went over to the hole. Up close, it was darker than it had any right to be. I leaned in and looked, but couldn't see anything. Just black, the kind that doesn't seem to have a back to it. And then there was the liquid. It dripped slowly from somewhere inside the hole, one drop every several seconds, collecting in a small dark smear on the wall beneath it and then on the floor. I crouched down and looked at it. Thick, viscous in the way that motor oil is. The way it holds together and moves reluctantly. Black, or close enough to it. And the smell, diesel. That heavy petroleum smell. Though with something else underneath it I couldn't quite place. Something almost organic. I didn't touch it with my bare fingers. I used the edge of my sleeve, just a brief contact, and it clung in a way that felt unnatural. I still don't know what made me do it, but later, much later after more pacing, after trying to sleep on the floor and finding that I apparently couldn't sleep inside a dream, I pushed my arm into the hole up to the elbow. The edges were smooth, almost polished, cold inside, colder than the room. I pushed my arm in further, past the elbow, until my cheek was pressed against the wall and my shoulder was wedged against the opening, and I still couldn't feel the end of it. Just cold air and nothing. My fingers found no wall, no debris, no change in surface. I pulled my arm out and the sleeve was damp with the dark liquid, and the smell of it stayed on me for the rest of the time I was in there. I don't know how to describe what 8 hours in that room does to a person. After the first couple of hours, the pacing stops feeling productive and starts feeling like what it is, which is desperation. I talked to myself for a while. I sat in the corner farthest from the hole and stared at the walls and tried to do math problems in my head to stay focused. I'm an engineering student, so I have a decent backlog of those. At some point, I started to feel the edges of something I can only describe as a loosening. Like the part of me that organizes the world into comprehensible pieces was starting to get tired of the effort. I caught myself just staring at the mold on the opposite wall for what must have been a long time, not thinking, just staring. That scared me more than the room did. And then I woke up. It was like breaking the surface of water. My own ceiling, my own room, morning light coming in at the sides of the blinds. I lay there breathing for a while. Relief is the right word for those first few seconds. Genuine, physical relief, the kind you feel in your feet when you lay down after a 10-hour shift. But it hasn't totally left me. That buzzing feeling. It's quieter now, and maybe I'm imagining it, but sitting here at my desk recording this, I keep thinking I can still feel a faint edge of it, like a sound that stopped a few seconds ago. You're not quite sure if you're still hearing it or just remembering it. It was just a dream. I've got a thermodynamics problem set due Thursday, and I haven't started it. I'm going to make coffee and get to work and forget about this. Hopefully recording this will set my mind at ease and allow me to focus. March 3rd, 2026. It happened again. I told myself yesterday that recording it would help, but getting it out of my head would be the end of it. One strange dream, documented, filed away forever. I almost believed that. I went to bed last night feeling fine, or close enough to fine, and I woke up on that floor again. Same room, same cold concrete, same low ceiling, same mold spreading across the walls in those dark, ugly patches. Same hole in the wall, same endless dark inside of it. For a moment, I just sat there with my eyes closed and thought, seriously, you have to be kidding me. Because I knew immediately where I was. There was no adjustment period this time, no slow, dawning realization. I opened my eyes, knew where I was, and the buzzing started up the same second, like it had been patiently waiting for my return. I noted the slight differences pretty quickly once I started looking. The liquid from the hole was moving faster. Not dramatically, it wasn't flowing, it was dripping. But where the last time I could count several seconds between drops, now they came faster, more insistently, like a faucet that hadn't been fully shut off. The smell hit me sooner too. The same rank diesel smell filling up the small space. Except it wasn't quite as small. That took me longer to notice, because there's no obvious way to measure a room with your eyes. But I walked the perimeter and it felt different. Larger. A foot on each side maybe, possibly less, but enough that when I stood in the center, the walls seemed just slightly farther away than they should have been. And the light, whatever sourceless light had let me see everything clear the first time, was dimmer. Still enough to see by, but with a flatness to it the first dream hadn't had. Like the difference between an overcast day and the very start of dusk. I told myself everything I told myself the night before. You're dreaming, this is temporary, you'll wake up. I paced. I did the problem set I'd finished yesterday in my head, step by step, checking my own work. I sat down and tried to breathe slowly and evenly. It didn't hold. Maybe 2 hours in, something cracked. I don't know exactly what triggered it. I was standing near the hole, not doing anything, just standing there, and I looked into the dark inside it, and something about the way it had no bottom, no end, no answer to it, just that endless, patient black, hit me in a way that it hadn't until then. My chest locked up, my hands started shaking, and then my arms, and then my whole body was shaking, and I couldn't pull a full breath in no matter how wide I opened my mouth. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor with my knees up and my head down and tried to find the bottom of the panic, but for a long time, there wasn't one. The buzzing got worse. The only thing I can say about it is that it intensified, the way a sound gets louder when you're suddenly aware of it, except this wasn't sound, it was deeper than that. And it got bad enough that it felt like it was coming from inside my skull, from behind my eyes. Luckily, the feeling became strong enough to wake me up. Not gently this time, gasping, sitting right up, hands grabbing at the blanket. 4:14 in the morning, according to my phone. My heart was going fast enough that I could feel it in my throat. I sat on the edge of my bed for a while, waiting for it to slow down, and then I got up, because lying there in the dark didn't feel like an option. I went to the kitchen and ate some crackers and peanut butter, standing over the sink like some kind of anxious raccoon. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror for a while. I looked fine, normal, a little pale, maybe, but fine. I went back to bed to lay on top of the covers and stare at the ceiling, thinking about whether I wanted to go back to sleep. The answer was no. I went back to sleep anyway. The room was waiting. Larger again. Not much, but I could tell. A little shade dimmer than it had been when I'd left, however briefly. The dripping from the hole was a little faster still. I don't know if those changes happened because I'd been gone, or if they would have happened regardless. I don't know anything about the logic of this place. If logic is even a word that applies. I made the decision, standing there in the dark room at 4 in the morning, or whatever time it was in the real world. I was not going to have another panic attack. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was, but because whatever that spike of fear had done to the buzzing, I didn't want to feel again. So I picked a wall and sat down with my back against it, and I started talking, out loud to myself, in a low, steady voice. I narrated what I could remember of my thermodynamics notes from the beginning of the semester. I worked through every problem from my homework I could remember. I described, in as much detail as I could, every meal I'd eaten in the last week. I talked about a camping trip my dad took me on when I was 12, described the drive there, the campsite, the specific way the fire smelled. I kept my eyes away from the hole. I kept my voice even. I don't even know how well I succeeded, but I made it through. When I woke up this morning, I laid in bed for a long time without moving. I'm going to the doctor. I don't know what I'm going to say. I haven't figured out how to describe this without sounding like someone who needs a different kind of help than a general practitioner can offer. But I need to talk to someone who might be able to do something about my sleep. Whether that's medication or a referral or just someone telling me this is normal and here's why, I don't care. I'll take any of it. I just need a night where when I close my eyes, there's nothing there. Just dark and then morning. That's all I want. March 4th, 2026. The doctor was nice enough. Young for a doctor, probably only a few years older than me. The kind of guy who nods a lot while you're talking and writes things down with what seems to be genuine attentiveness. I sat on the crinkly paper of the exam table and told him about the dream, keeping it vague, saying it was vivid and distressing and that I was waking up in the middle of the night and having trouble getting back to sleep. I didn't describe the room in detail. I didn't mention the hole. I don't know why. Maybe because saying it out loud to a stranger in a clinical setting would have made it either too real or too absurd, and I wasn't ready for either. He told me I was experiencing night terrors. He said it with the comfortable confidence of someone recalling a fact they've recalled many times before, and I could tell he expected that to land with some weight, the way a diagnosis usually does. It didn't, particularly. He went through the list of things I should avoid: caffeine, alcohol, marijuana, screens before bed. He talked about meditation while falling asleep. Something about giving the brain a neutral focal point so it doesn't generate its own. He told me that if it continued, he'd refer me to a sleep study where they could monitor my brain activity and potentially identify something more specific, and told me most people see improvement within a couple of weeks with therapy and healthy sleeping habits. I thanked him and left to sit in my car in the parking lot for about 10 minutes. Night terrors. Avoid caffeine. Most people see improvement. I don't know what I expected him to say. There isn't a diagnosis for what I'm describing, not really, and even if there were, it wouldn't change the fact that tonight I'm going to lie down in my bed, close my eyes, and end up back in that room. A name for it doesn't help with that. A referral to a sleep study doesn't help with that. I drove home, made dinner, and didn't drink coffee, which I desperately wanted. I sat on my couch and tried to do the meditation thing using a video I found online. It helped a little, not nearly enough though. Getting ready for bed was its own ordeal. I kept slowing down, whether intentionally or not. I brushed my teeth for probably 15 minutes. I found myself standing in the bathroom dark after turning the light off, not moving, not particularly thinking, just not going to bed. Eventually, I made myself lie down. I stared at the ceiling. I tried the meditation again, focusing on my breathing, counting exhales, all of it. The buzzing started before I was even asleep, faint like an early warning system. My whole body wanted to stay awake. I lay there for a long time, maybe an hour, rigid and resistant. And then, at some point, exhaustion won, and I went under. The room was bigger. I could feel it immediately. The ceiling seemed slightly higher, the walls slightly further, and the light was dull in a way that reminded me of a room lit only by an overcast sky coming through the window. The dripping from the hole was almost a trickle now. Not quite, but trending in that direction. A steady rhythm of dark liquid running down the wall and pooling at the base of it. The pool was small, but it was a pool. Last time it had just been a smear. I stood in the center of the room and did my rough calculations, the same way I had the night before, and I estimated maybe 20% larger than the first time. 20% dimmer. The smell was worse, more present, filling the room fully now rather than just hanging near the hole. And then I felt it. I was standing in the middle of the room doing nothing, and I felt that I was not alone. I turned around, I checked every corner, I walked the perimeter slowly, trailing my hand along the wall, looking at everything carefully. There was nothing there. No person, no shape, no shadow that didn't belong to me. Nothing near the hole, nothing near the floor, nothing on the ceiling. I was alone in every observable sense, but that feeling didn't leave. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say feeling, because it wasn't imagination and it wasn't paranoia, or if it was the most fully convincing version of either I've ever experienced. It was the specific sensation of being observed, of being the subject of attention, the way you can sometimes tell without looking that someone in the room has turned to look at you. That particular pressure of awareness. Something was watching me. Something was in the room with me in a way that my eyes couldn't locate or confirm. And it was watching me with what I can only describe as patience. Like it was waiting to see what I would do. Like it had all the time in the world and was in no hurry whatsoever. I lasted maybe an hour and a half before the panic took over. Same as before. The chest, the shaking, the inability to breathe. The buzzing spiked. I awoke at 2:47 a.m. with my pillow damp from sweat and my hands balled into fists at my sides. I did not go back to sleep. I laid in bed until 3, then got up and turned on every light in my apartment and sat at my desk. I worked on a lab report. I watched 2 episodes of a show I've seen before. Nothing that required attention, just noise and light and the presence of human faces and speech. I made eggs at 6. I showered and got dressed and went to my 8 o'clock class. I sat through 2 lectures and a lab session today, running on no sleep, just the sheer mechanical momentum of a schedule. I don't remember much of what was covered. Somewhere between the lab session and walking back to my car, I made the decision. I'm going back to the doctor, today, after class. I don't care if he just tells me the same thing again. I need to tell him it's getting worse, and I need him to know that whatever this is, it isn't responding to not drinking coffee before bed. I need someone to take this seriously. I'm starting to think that I need to take this more seriously too, because a part of me has been treating this entire thing like venting, like if I describe it thoroughly enough, it will start to seem manageable. It doesn't seem manageable. Whatever is in that room with me, and something is in the room with me, it isn't going anywhere. And neither, apparently, is the room. March 5th, 2026. The doctor referred me to a sleep assessment next Wednesday. I sat across from him and nodded and tried to look like a week was an acceptable amount of time to wait, and then I asked him if there was anything he could give me in the meantime. He didn't love the question. I could see it in the slight pause, the way he glanced at his notes before answering. But I told him I hadn't slept a full night in days, that I was falling behind in my classes, that I was exhausted in a way that was starting to affect my ability to function. All of which is true. He typed something, paused, and then typed again, and then printed a prescription for a low dose of benzodiazepine. He told me to take it only as needed, and told me not to drink with it, and told me to call if anything felt wrong. He said it like he was hoping I wouldn't need to call. I filled the prescription on the way home, took the pill about an hour before bed, sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of water, and staring at it in my palm for longer than was probably necessary. It was small, white, oblong, totally ordinary. I swallowed it and waited. Eventually, I felt the edges of myself go soft and far away, which was a relief, honestly. My body relaxed in a way it hadn't in days. I went to sleep feeling, for the first time in a week, like maybe sleep was going to be okay. The floor was cold under my cheek. Relief would not find me tonight. I sat up and looked around. The room had grown again. Not enormous, not cavernous, but noticeably larger than the last time. The light was flat and dim. The liquid from the hole was moving faster. A thin but steady stream now. A dark ribbon running down the wall. I sat there for a moment, registering all of this, and then I looked at the floor and saw it. In the center of the room, a single pill, white, oblong, identical in every visible way to the one I had taken before bed. It was sitting on the concrete floor in the middle of the room like it had always been there. I walked over and crouched down, looked at it without touching it. I looked around the room again. The feeling of being watched was gone, completely, cleanly absent in a way I hadn't fully appreciated until now, feeling its absence. I was alone, actually alone. Whatever presence had been in that room the night before wasn't there, and the difference was significant enough that the room almost felt safe by comparison. Almost. I didn't know what to do with the pill. I thought about leaving it on the floor, about picking it up and putting it somewhere specific, about a lot of things. Eventually, I picked it up and put it in the pocket of my jeans, which somehow seemed better than leaving it in the middle of the floor. I decided to measure the room. It was something to do, and it seemed like useful information to have. I took off one shoe and used it as a unit of measurement, walking the perimeter and counting carefully. 30 shoe lengths by 48 and a half. I repeated the measurement to verify. Same result. I noted the dimensions the way I'd note data from a lab, trying to think of it clinically, like I was running an experiment and this was just data collection. It helped a little to frame it that way. I tried scratching into the wall with my fingernails. I don't know what I was hoping to achieve. Marking the wall felt like doing something, which was the point. But the concrete didn't give at all, not even a pale streak. My fingernails came away intact, and the wall was unchanged. I pressed my palm flat against it and pushed as hard as I could, which accomplished nothing. I knocked on various sections, hoping for a hollow sound. Nothing. I paced. I did calculations in my head. I narrated things to myself in a low voice. The hours moved the way they had the first night, slowly. At some point, I started going stir-crazy in a way that felt different from anxiety, more animal than that, the specific misery of a creature in a too small space, even though the space wasn't quite small anymore. After what I estimated was 3 or 4 hours, I sat down in the corner and put my hands in my pockets and felt the pill between my fingers. I thought about it for a while. I took it out and looked at it. Then I swallowed it, because I couldn't think of a good reason not to, and I was desperate for something to change. The headache started within seconds, not building gradually the way headaches normally do, but arriving fully formed and worsening immediately. A pressure behind my eyes that doubled and then doubled again, moving from uncomfortable to painful to the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life within the span of maybe 2 minutes. I got to my hands and knees on the concrete and pressed my forehead against the floor. The cold helped for a few seconds and then stopped. I puked repeatedly until there was nothing left, and then I dry heaved for a while with my cheek on the concrete floor next to the mess I'd made. The headache kept going, kept building, kept finding new registers of pain I hadn't known were available. My only thought was that I was in hell. I woke up at 3:31 a.m. My bed was soaked in vomit. I lay in it for a few seconds, too stunned to move, and then I got up, took off everything, and carried it to the bathroom, where I turned on the shower and sat on the edge of the tub while the sheets rinsed. The headache was gone, completely gone, not even an echo of it. I cleaned everything as thoroughly as I could at 3 in the morning, remade the bed with the spare set from the closet, and sat in the kitchen until dawn. I didn't sleep. I wasn't going to sleep. I went to my classes on autopilot, running on bad coffee and the same grim mechanical routine of a schedule that got me through yesterday. I was fine through the first 2 classes. The third one was an afternoon lecture in a warm room, with a professor whose steady, unhurried voice felt like a melodyless lullaby. I didn't make it. I wasn't even aware of falling asleep. One moment I was looking at the slide on the projector screen, and the next I was on an all too familiar floor. The room, dim, larger, the stream of dark liquid running steadily down the wall. I stood up and felt the familiar weight of all of it settle over me. And I was calculating how long I'd have to be here before class ended when I heard something. A voice, muffled, distant, but recognizable, my professor's voice, coming from the direction of the hole. I stood still and listened. It was indistinct at first, just the rhythm and cadence of a lecture, and then I walked slowly toward the wall and crouched down next to it to put my ear close to the opening without touching it. His voice was clearer. The diesel smell was strong at this distance. I could make out words, a sentence about load distribution, another about structural tolerances, and then distinctly, clearly, coming out of that lightless hole in the concrete wall was my name. I woke up to him saying it out loud in the classroom, standing over my desk with the particular expression of someone who has been patient for long enough. Half the class was looking at me. He told me in a quiet, controlled voice that he expected more from students in this program, that sleeping in lecture was disrespectful, and that he hoped it wouldn't happen again. I said, "No, sir, it won't." He moved on. I sat for the rest of the lecture staring at the desk, fingernails digging into my legs. The pain was able to keep me awake. I don't know what to do tonight. I can't take the pill again, obviously. I'm not sure sleep is something I want to do at all, but I can't keep waking up at 3 in the morning and going to class on nothing. I have the sleep assessment on Wednesday, which is 5 days away. I have a lab report due Thursday and an exam the following Monday, and a professor who now watches me during the lecture to make sure my eyes are open. I have a room in my head that is slowly getting larger and darker, a hole in the wall that apparently carries sound from one world to the other, and no good explanation for any of it. March 5th, 2026. I thought I had it figured out. The part that gets me, sitting here at 11:48 at night with my knuckles split open and bleeding onto the edge of my desk, I actually felt good about this one. I spent the afternoon building a playlist, 8 hours exactly, timed it out to the minute, with all the bands I know well enough that the music would feel like company. The loud kind, the kind that fills a room completely and doesn't leave space for anything else to live in. I figured if the hole could carry my professor's voice into the room, it could carry my music as well. Give me something to do in there, something to focus on, something that was mine and from the real world, not from that room. I put my phone on the nightstand with the speaker facing up, the music high, and I felt, genuinely felt, a loosening of the anxiety that's been sitting on my chest for a week. A plan. I finally had a plan. I fell asleep, hit the floor, and the room was silent. Not quiet, absolutely silent. The absence of the music I knew was playing 15 feet away on my nightstand was more unsettling than the buzzing feeling. The room was bigger again, darker. The stream from the hole had widened, dark liquid running steadily down the wall and spreading across the floor in a slow, creaking slick that caught what little light there was. And the feeling was back. The being watched feeling. Immediate and total, like walking into a room and knowing without looking that every head has turned toward you. My stomach dropped. I stood in the middle of the room and breathed and tried to think. The hole. The professor's voice had come through the hole. I walked over and crouched down, put my ear close to the opening, keeping my face away from the stream of liquid running beneath it, and listened intently. The music was there, faint, thin, like hearing something from 3 rooms away through closed doors, but it was still there. I could make out the specific song, which meant something was transmitting, just poorly. Last time, the sound had been clearer. Something had changed. I thought about that for a moment, and then thought, something is in the way. And then before I'd fully decided to do it, my arm was going into the hole. Shoulder against the wall, cheek against the concrete, arm extended as far as it would go. The cold closed around my arm the way it had the first time. I moved my fingers slowly through the dark, feeling nothing. And then something. Soft. The tips of my fingers registered soft before anything else. Unexpected enough that I pulled back slightly before pushing forward again. Something was in there. Wedged at the very limit of my reach, and I could just barely make contact with the edge of it. I pressed further. The concrete edge of the hole dug into my shoulder. I turned my face harder into the wall and stretched until my fingers found purchase on the thing, and I pulled. It came out slowly, catching on the edge of the hole, and I had to work it loose with careful movements before it came free all at once. I stumbled back with it in my hand. I held it up and looked at it. A doll. Small, fitting easily in one hand, made of yarn, or something like yarn. The crochet uneven and crude, like something made by someone who didn't know how or didn't care. Button eyes, 2 of them, mismatched in size, sewn on with dark thread. It was soaked in the black substance, heavy with it, the smell of diesel rising off in a noxious wave. The yarn itself, under the coating, looked like it might have once been a pale color. Might have. I turned it over in my hands and looked at it from every angle and tried to locate a rational explanation for its presence and came up empty. I could hear the music now, clear as the way it had been when I'd heard my professor coming through the open hole without obstruction. The song that was playing was one I'd put near the front of the playlist. I carried the doll to the far corner of the room, the one farthest from the hole, and set it down facing the wall. I don't know why facing the wall. It seemed better than leaving it facing forward. The music started to change. Not the song itself, just the quality of it. A warping, stretching of the sound, like a recording being manipulated, pitches bending in ways that didn't correspond to any of the instruments actually playing. I straightened up from setting the doll down and felt the dread arrive. Not gradually, but all at once. A wave of it that started in my stomach and moved upward. I turned around. The doll was standing. Not fallen over, not propped up against the wall, standing upright on its own in the center of the corner. Its mismatched button eyes were oriented toward me with an intentionality that button eyes on a stuffed figure have no business having. The music continued to warp and stretch through the hole. The liquid was moving faster, noticeably faster. The flow from the hole increasing, spreading further across the floor. I heard the whispers start. They came from the doll. I don't know what language. I don't know if language is even the right word. It was sounds that had a rhythm and cadence of speech, without any content I could identify, layered over each other. Several voices at different pitches all going at once. I stood against the opposite wall and listened to them for a whole 2 seconds before something in me gave way. I hit the wall with my fist. I don't remember deciding to. My hand just moved, connecting with the concrete, hard enough that the pain was immediate and significant, and I hit it again, and then I was hitting it with both hands, not because I thought it would do anything, but because my body had moved past the point of thinking and into something more basic, something that only knew enclosure and threat and the need to get out. I clawed at the concrete. I could feel the skin on my knuckles opening. The whispers were louder. The liquid was spreading fast across the floor, a supernatural cold against my feet. I could hear it in my ears, in my chest, all of it at once. The warping music and the whispers and the buzzing louder than it had ever been, and my own voice making sounds I wasn't choosing to make. And then I felt the wall move. Just slightly, just a give, just the faintest sense of something structural yielding under my hands. Instead of stopping, I stepped back and threw myself at it with everything I had, shoulder first. It gave. I went through it. There was no other side. That's what I understood in the single second I had before I woke. There was no room on the other side, no corridor, no continuation. I was falling, open air, or what felt like open air. A void that had no visible bottom and no visible edges, just an infinite dark in every direction. I looked up because up was the only direction that had anything in it, and I could see the hole I'd come through, the room, the actual room, a pale rectangle of dim light above me and receding. Behind it, attached to the wall where the hole had been, a structure, concrete and massive, the same material as the room but scaled up enormously. A brutalist bulk of it extending upward and sideways. The room I'd been trapped in for 5 days was nothing more than a tiny cell on its exterior, a single pore on something vast. I woke up from the sensation of falling and hit the mattress. The phone on my nightstand said 11:48 p.m. The playlist was on the 4th song, which meant I'd been asleep for maybe 10 minutes. My hands are bad. I'm looking at them right now as I record this. The knuckles on my hands are split on all the fingers, and the left hand is bruised badly across the back and swollen at the base of the pinky. I should probably ice them. I'll ice them when I'm done recording this. I need to get all this out before any detail fades, because none of this can afford to fade. The structure, the size of it. The room is just a fraction of something that goes on further than I could see in a second of falling through the void. I still have the sleep assessment on Wednesday. That feels almost comical right now. What are they going to find? What is any of this? I need answers that no doctor's going to have. I think the only place those answers exist is in that room. I know how that sounds, but I've been approaching this as something happening to me, and I think that's been the wrong frame. There's more to this in the room, and whatever is in there watching me has the answers I seek. My nerves need to settle down first. I'm going to ice my hands, drink some water, and sit here until the shaking stops. March 6, 2026. I'm recording this from my bed. The nurse set up my tablet on the tray table. She was kind about it. She didn't ask why I needed it, just set it up, brought me some water, and left after the routine house visit, which is what I needed. I've been lying here trying to figure out where to start, and I think the only way is to just go through it in order and not stop. So that's what I'm going to do. I went back to sleep. I said I would, and I did, and the room was how I'd left it. That was the first thing I registered, almost exactly as I'd left it, except for the increase in size and the darkness that came with every entry. The hole I'd broken through was still there, a ragged gap in the concrete on the far wall, cold air coming through from the void on the other side. The floor was covered in the black liquid, the smell of it overwhelming. The music was still coming through the small hole, and the doll was in the corner facing the wall, exactly where I'd placed it before I'd noticed it had moved. Something had placed it back, set back the way I had originally put it, facing the wall, as if the thing was trying to convince me it had never moved at all. The buzzing was immediate and intense. The watched feeling was instantaneous and total. I stood in the liquid and felt both of those things for only a split second. I want to be honest about my mental state when I say that I mostly didn't care. Something had happened to me between the falling, the waking, the recording, going back under. Some threshold has been crossed. I looked around the room at all of it, the doll and the hole and the liquid and the dim light, and what I felt most strongly was not fear, but a kind of furious need to know. The structure I'd seen when falling, the massive concrete thing that the room was just a cell on, extending outwards further than I could see. I needed to get to it. I needed to get through the wall where the hole was. If I could get through it, I could get to something other than this damned room. Something that might have answers in it. I started hitting the wall. I know exactly how this sounds. I had already destroyed my hands once against these walls, and I went back and started doing it again. I cannot fully explain the state of mind, except to say that it wasn't a rational decision. It was barely a decision at all. The music helped in the worst possible way, filling the room with sound and momentum, and I hit the wall over and over again. The pain was extraordinary, but it was also somehow distant, like it was happening to someone nearby rather than to me. I clawed at the concrete. I used the heel of my palm, I used my elbow. I found a chunk of concrete near the broken wall in the far... I found a chunk of concrete near the broken hole in the far wall and used that, smashing it against the surface until it crumbled in my grip, and I was back to using my hands. I screamed at the wall. I told it to open. I don't remember a lot of the middle hours clearly, and I think that might be for the best. I was consumed by pure rage for what felt like an eternity. The wall didn't move. Not a single fracture, not a single chip. I could have been hitting it for a year and it wouldn't have mattered. I woke up at 12:18 a.m. The pain arrived the way light arrives after flipping a switch. I looked at my hands in the dark of the bedroom. The dark was actually helpful for a moment because I couldn't see them clearly. When I turned on the lamp, I saw them. I called 911 because there was nothing else to do. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher and didn't look at my hands again until the paramedics came. I watched the faces of the 2 EMTs that came in when they saw my condition. I've been around enough people to know when someone is controlling their expression carefully. They weren't professional. One of them said something reassuring that I don't remember. They got me onto the gurney and into the ambulance, and one of them held my arm still the whole ride because I kept involuntarily trying to move my hands. He just kept telling me very calmly, stay still and don't move. At the hospital, they gave me something for the pain through an IV. The relief was fast and made me feel very far away from everything, which was exactly what I wanted. A doctor came and looked at my hands for a long time without speaking, and then told me in a direct and serious voice that they needed to operate immediately, that there was significant structural damage, and that the goal was to preserve as much function as possible. They wheeled me into the operating room and put me under, and soon I was back in that familiar place before the ceiling of the operating room finished fading. Exactly as I'd left it, again. Liquid on the floor, doll in the corner. The only new thing being a bloody crater in the wall where I'd spent hours destroying my hands. Dark and grimy, going nowhere. I stood in the middle of the room and looked at all of it and understood immediately and with complete clarity that I could not be here, that I needed to wake up. I had no thoughts about how whatever was happening to my hands on the operating table required me to be unconscious, cooperative, and still. I ran at the hole in the far wall and jumped through. The void, the falling, the stomach drop of open nothingness, and then the operating table. I came back, gasping and thrashing about. The voices around me were all alarmed and immediate. Hands on my shoulders. Someone saying my vitals were spiking, and someone else saying more. They held me down as my body fought against the anesthesia, but it was no use, and I fell back under. I was back in the room. I ran through the hole, falling, table, voices, darkness. I don't know how many times I did this. Each time I broke the surface, they pushed me back down, and each time I came back from the room, the doll was in the corner, and the liquid was on the floor, and the bloody mark on the wall was there, and the buzzing was there, and the presence watching me was there. After a while, I didn't run for the hole. I don't know if I'd run out of the impulse or if some part of me understood that I was making things worse. I just stopped. I sat down in the middle of the floor in the black liquid and stayed there. The doll turned around at some point. I watched it happen, slow and mechanical, pivoting on whatever it uses instead of feet until the button eyes were pointed at me. I looked back at it. The liquid crept up from around me where I sat, soaking through my clothes, cold and thick and smelling the way it always smells. The whisper started eventually, layered and directionless, coming from the doll and from the walls and from somewhere that wasn't a location at all. The buzzing was at a constant high pitch, the presence bearing down on me from everywhere and nowhere. I sat in it, breathed it all in, and sunk into the panic attack fully and completely, letting it flow through me because there was nowhere to go, nothing to do. I cried, screamed, sobbed, sitting in a concrete room covered in black liquid. This must be what hell is like, incomprehensible suffering. It felt like much longer than a surgery takes. I woke up in the recovery room, white ceiling, warm blankets, the specific antiseptic smell of a hospital. A nurse checked on me almost immediately. I asked her how long I'd been under, and she said a little over 4 hours. 4 hours. I've spent more time in that room than 4 hours before. I know what it feels like. That was not 4 hours. The doctor came and talked to me about the surgery. Significant damage, multiple fractures, tissue loss. 2 fingers on the right hand cannot be saved. He told me my hands would require extensive rehabilitation and that full function was unlikely. He told me that it was important that I was honest with him about what had happened. I told him I'd been sleepwalking and hadn't realized what I was doing until it was too late. He looked at me for a moment, obviously not believing me, and wrote something down before nodding and leaving. I'm not going to sleep. I want to be clear about that. I want to record it so I can hear it later when I've forgotten. I am not going to sleep. I don't care about the sleep assessment on Wednesday. I don't care what the doctor says about sleep deprivation or cognitive function or any of it. I know what is waiting for me when I close my eyes. I know what it does, and I am done. I will never see that room again. I'm not going to sleep. I will never see that room again. I am not going to sleep. Fear can keep me awake. I am not going to sleep. I will never sleep.
March 10th, 2026. I don't know why I'm writing this down. I'm not a journal person. I've never kept a diary or a blog or anything of the sort. I'm doing this because something has been sitting in the back of my mind for a few days now, and I can't get it out. My therapist, who I started seeing after all of this, says that writing things down can help externalize them. So, here I am. This all started when a young man was admitted into the ward I work at. His name was Zachary. I won't use his last name. I don't think that's appropriate, especially with the family's lawsuits still ongoing. But I'll call him Zach because that's what he asked me to call him. And it feels wrong to refer to him as the patient or the young man or any of the clinical distinctive language we sometimes fall into in this profession when things get hard. But I'll call him Zach because that's what he asked me to call him, and it feels wrong to refer to him as the patient or the young man or any of the clinical distancing language we sometimes fall into in this profession when things get hard. He came in through emergency in the early hours of the morning, with his hands in a condition I'm not going to describe in detail. I've been a nurse for 11 years, and I had to take a breath before going into his room. He was 22 years old, an engineering student. Before everything happened to him, he was, by all accounts, a perfectly normal young man with decent grades and a full life ahead of him. I want to say that first because by the time most people encountered him in those last couple of days, normal is not the word they would have used. After the surgery, he was moved to a recovery room and then to a standard room on our ward. The plan was to stabilize him, manage his pain, and arrange a transfer to an appropriate facility for psychiatric evaluation. That was the plan. He refused to sleep consistently and completely. We would administer sedatives as prescribed. He would go under, but then, within a few minutes, he would be awake again, thrashing about and destroying everything around him. We just kept increasing his dose of sedative. During the rare occasions when he was lucid, he talked, mostly to me, for whatever reason. I think it was because I was the one who set up his voice keyboard and he associated me with being listened to. He talked like he knew exactly what he was saying, but all that came out was incoherent nonsense. Sometimes I'd catch a glimmer of a half-baked thought about a hole, a doll, or some kind of black liquid. None of it really ever made any kind of sense. The lawsuit. I'm not going to say much about the lawsuit except that the family has grounds and I hope they get what they're seeking. I'll leave it at that. What happened with the sedative dosage was not my shift and not my error. I have given a full statement to the relevant parties. Zach was 22 years old. He was afraid to sleep. He spent his last coherent days fighting as hard as he could to stay awake. And then he wasn't awake anymore. And there was nothing anyone could do about it. I said I'm writing this because something is sitting in my mind and won't leave. It's something he said. One of the times he was lucid and talking, 2 days before the end. He was looking at the ceiling, and he said it almost to himself, not really to me. He said, "There's a hole in the wall, and I think it goes further than the room. I think whatever's on the other side has been watching for a long time." He said it quietly, not with the agitation he usually had, almost with a kind of exhausted acceptance. I wrote it down on a notepad I had in my pocket because I didn't know what else to do with it. I still have the notepad. A hole in the wall. I had no idea what he meant, but something about it scared me. Last night I had a strange dream. I was in a concrete room. The walls were damp, mold spreading across them in dark patches. No windows, no doors. The ceiling was low. There was a single feature in the room, a circular hole in the wall. The dream felt like it lasted an eternity. I've never been more relieved to wake up in my entire life. I'm sure it's nothing. The imagery of his final coherent thought embedded itself into my subconscious. My sleeping brain did what sleeping brains do and embedded imagery. That's the only thing this is.
And make them into full-fledged songs. And with all that said, enjoy the video. Martin pressed the record button on the handheld unit and held it close to his mouth as he ducked under the rope the patrol officers had strung between the trees.
October 14th, 1972. George Washington Park, Centralia. Arrived on scene at approximately 9:45 in the morning. Initial assessment. 4 victims, male, adults, suspended, inverted from separate trees. All 4 wearing hunting clothing. Rifles and sidearms still on their persons. Robbery does not appear to be a motive.
He released the button and stood still for a moment, taking in the scene properly before he moved any closer. The morning light was coming through the canopy at a low angle, catching the dew on the grass and throwing long shadows across the ground. The 4 men hung in a loose row, each from a different oak, their left ankles tied to a branch with what looked like homemade hemp rope. Their arms hung straight down toward the earth, fingers slightly curled. Their faces were dark with pooled blood. He pressed record again.
The hanging configuration is deliberate and consistent across all 4 bodies. Ritualistic presentation cannot be ruled out. 2 possible reference points come to mind. First, the martyrdom of St. Peter, who was crucified inverted at his own request. Second, the Hanged Man card in the tarot deck, which depicts a figure suspended from 1 foot in a posture nearly identical to this. We'll revisit both lines of thinking once more information is available.
He released the button and walked toward the nearest body. He crouched down, bringing his face level with the man's inverted head. There were small cuts all over, but the main wounds were concentrated on the torso and legs. Multiple punctures, some deep, some shallow. The surrounding tissue ragged and torn in a way that was inconsistent with a straight blade. He tilted his head and examined the margins of one of the larger wounds on the man's side.
Wounds across all visible portions of the torso appear to have been inflicted by a serrated instrument. Jagged entry points, tearing rather than clean separation of tissue. Consistent with repeated stabbing rather than a single or a small number of strikes. This was not efficient. This took time. There also appears to be what I can only describe as hundreds of paper cuts all over the exposed skin.
He stood and moved to the second body, then the third, finding the same pattern each time. By the 4th, he had stopped recording and was simply looking, his hands on his coat pockets, the recorder hanging from his fingers. His apprentice, a younger man named Drew Kowalski, appeared at his shoulder. Drew had a notepad and kept glancing at it as he spoke, the way he always did when he was trying to make sure he delivered information correctly.
Jogger found them around 4 in the morning. Woman, early 30s. She runs around this park most days before work. She called it in from a payphone on Maple. Officers arrived on the scene by 4:20.
Any chance she saw anyone else out there?
She said no. Just the bodies.
Martin looked up at the nearest man's boot, at the careful knot of the rope.
Identifications.
Drew looked at his notepad.
All 4 from Seattle. They drove down together 2 days ago from a hunting trip. Carl Detman, 51. His brother Roy Detmond, 48. A man named Phil Okafor, 44. And a Thomas Brightwell, 52.
4 men out of Seattle for a hunting trip. And they ended up here.
There's a 5th man in their group. He came forward about an hour ago, talked to one of the patrol officers. Says he stayed back in town yesterday while the other four went out. Claims they left in the morning and he never saw them again.
Martin looked at him.
Where is he now?
Probably still at the hotel. They were all staying at the Landers just off the main road. About a 5-minute drive.
Martin pressed record one more time as he turned and walked back toward the rope boundary.
Proceeding to interview 5th member of the hunting party. We'll update notes following interview.
He clicked it off and slipped the recorder into his coat pocket. Drew fell into step beside him as they crossed the wet grass toward the parking area, the trees behind them still holding their grim weight in the pale October light. The room smelled like cigarettes and the particular stale warmth of a heating unit that had been running all night. Martin sat in the chair beside the small desk, Drew standing near the door with his notepad. Bob Ellers was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, sitting on the edge of the bed with his hands clasped between his knees.
I already told all this to the officer this morning.
I know you did. And I appreciate your patience. I just need to hear it myself. How long have you known Carl, Roy, Phil, and Thomas?
Carl and I go back to high school. The others, maybe 15 years, give or take. We've all been close a long time.
And this hunting trip, had you all done this before? Come down to Centralia specifically.
Every year. This would have been our 6th time, I think. Maybe 7th. We like it out here. It's quiet. The hunting's good.
Do you know anyone in Centralia? Anyone you've gotten friendly with over the years? A local you stay in touch with?
Not really. We keep to ourselves when we're down here. It's about the hunting, not the socializing.
Is there anyone who might have known you were coming? Someone from back in Seattle? Maybe someone who knew your routine?
Bob looked at him.
You mean like an enemy?
Like anyone who might wish the group harm and knew where you'd be?
No.
Bob said flatly without hesitation.
We're not that kind of people. We work, we get together on weekends, we do this trip once a year. Nobody has enemies. That's not our life.
Martin nodded.
Walk me through everything from the time you arrived in Centralia until this morning. Everything you can remember.
We got in yesterday afternoon, around 2, maybe 2:30. Checked in here, dropped our bags, then we went for lunch at that diner on the main road. After that, we walked over to the hunting shop, just to browse. Phil ended up buying a new scope. Spent about 20 minutes talking to the man behind the counter about it. Then we just walked around town for a while, looked in some of the shop windows. Nothing specific, just passing time. We came back here for dinner, ate at the hotel restaurant. Then we went to the bar down the street for drinks.
Which bar?
Hannigan's, I think. The one with the green sign.
Okay. Go on.
We were there maybe 2 hours. It was a good night. Everybody was in a good mood. Phil got talking to a woman at the bar. A young woman, late 20s maybe. She had that kind of look, you know? Long skirts, lots of beads. A hippie type.
Just Phil?
Phil and Thomas both ended up sitting with her. The rest of us were at the other end of the bar. I could see them talking, but I wasn't part of the conversation.
Do you know what they talked about?
She did some kind of tarot reading for them. Phil and Thomas both. I remember thinking it was funny. Phil's not that kind of guy, but he was eating it up.
Martin leaned forward slightly.
Do you know her name?
I never caught it. Like I said, I wasn't over there with them. Only Phil and Thomas really spent time with her.
What happened at the end of the night?
Phil left with her. Just the two of them. Rest of us came back here around 11. Phil didn't show up until maybe 1 in the morning. Said he almost got unlucky with the hippie.
Bob's mouth tightened.
We gave him a hard time about it the way you do. Then we all went to bed. Early morning. Hunting trip.
But you didn't go.
My knee.
He patted his left leg.
It's been bad for a couple weeks. I thought I could push through, but when I woke up, I could barely get down the stairs. I told them to go without me. I was gonna rest it and meet them for dinner tonight. That was the last time I saw them.
Martin let a moment pass then reached into his jacket and produced a folded road map of the area. He opened it and held it out toward Bob.
Can you show me where the hunting spot was? Where they were headed this morning?
Bob took the map and studied it for a moment, then pressed his finger down on a stretch of wooded land.
Somewhere in here. We have a spot we've used before. Down a dirt trail, barely wide enough for the truck. I've only been in there a few times. My knee's been a problem for a few years now.
Martin took the map back and studied the area Bob had indicated, then folded it and put it away.
Thank you, Bob. I mean that. I know this has been a terrible morning.
Bob looked at the floor and said nothing. Martin stood, buttoned his coat, and nodded to Drew. They let themselves out into the hallway and walked toward the stairwell without speaking until they were outside in the parking lot and the cold air settled around them.
Hannigans, before we go anywhere near that hunting spot, I want to find this woman.
You think a bartender would know her?
It's a small town, and she apparently makes an impression.
He opened the car door.
Let's find out.
Hannigan's was dim even in the middle of the morning, the kind of bar that never quite admitted daylight regardless of the hour. Two men sat at the opposite end of the counter, nursing coffee, and a woman in her 40s was wiping down the taps with a rag. She looked up when Martin and Drew came through the door. Martin showed his badge, and she sat the rag down.
We're looking for a woman who was in here last night. Late 20s, describes to us as having a bohemian appearance. Long skirts, jewelry. She was doing tarot readings for some of the patrons.
The bartender's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile.
That's Ingrid.
You know her?
She's in here probably 4 nights a week. Has been for, I don't know, a year now maybe. She comes in, sits at the bar, and the men find their way over to her. She's very pretty. She does the cards for them and they love it.
She picked up the rag again, more out of habit than purpose.
She usually ends up leaving with someone before the night's over.
Every time?
More often than not.
Has she ever caused any trouble here?
Never. She's quiet. She's polite with me. She pays her tab. Whatever she gets up to after she walks out that door is her own business.
Her last name. Do you know it?
Cullum. Ingrid Cullum.
Drew wrote it down.
Do you have an address for her? Anything she might have left on a tab? A check?
She always pays with cash. But I know she lives out of town. She's mentioned it. Far out, like 40 miles or so. I couldn't tell you more than that.
Martin thanked her, and they stepped back out into the gray morning. The clerk at the town hall was a thin, older man who seemed pleased to have something to do. He pulled the property registration ledgers without complaint and set them on the counter. Martin and Drew went through them methodically. There was no listing for any Ingrid Callum. No property, no registered address, nothing. Drew turned a page and ran his finger down a column, then stopped.
George Callum. Property registered 1966.
Martin leaned over and looked. The listed address placed the property approximately 40 miles outside of Centralia, out along a rural road that wound northeast through the forest. Martin unfolded his map on the counter and found the road. He traced it with his finger until he located the approximate position of the property, then held the map flat and found the spot Bob had pressed his finger against that morning. Less than a mile separated them. He folded the map slowly.
George Callum is probably a relative. Father, maybe an uncle.
Possibly.
Martin buttoned the top button of his coat.
What I know is that Ingram Talum did tarot readings for our victims, leaves with one, and it just so turns out that a property registered to someone with her surname sits less than a mile from where our victims went to go hunting.
He picked up the map.
That makes her our primary suspect.
Drew looked at him.
You think a woman in her late 20s did that to 4 armed men?
I think she may not have done it alone.
He moved towards the door.
Let's go find her and see what else this story has to say.
They drove out of Centralia as the clouds thickened overhead and the tree line on either side of the road grew denser, the oaks giving way to older firs that pressed close to the shoulder. The address was 41 miles by the odometer, along a road that became gravel after the first 30, the stones clicking up against the undercarriage as they pushed further into the trees. Neither of them spoke for most of the drive. The house looked less like something that had been constructed and more like something that had simply accumulated over decades. The walls thick with climbing vines, the porch sagging gently under the weight of ceramic planters and stacked firewood. The roofline was irregular in a way that suggested additions made without much planning, and the whole structure sat back from the road as though it had been slowly retreating into the tree line behind it. A Chrysler Windsor, old and dark green, sat in the dirt out front with a film of mud along its lower panels. Two boys were crouched near the base of a large fir, arranging sticks into some configuration that had meaning only to them. When the car came to a stop, the smaller one looked up, stared for half a second, then scrambled to his feet and ran for the front door without a word. The older boy stood up slowly and watched them get out of the car with an expression that was more curious than alarmed. Martin and Drew had barely made it to the edge of the porch steps when the front door opened and a man came out holding a rifle loose at his side. He was in his early 30s, broad across the shoulders, with a kind of stillness in his posture that came either from confidence or from living far from other people for a long time.
Help you with something?
Martin held up his badge.
My name is Martin Stanze. I'm a detective investigating the deaths of 4 men found in George Washington Park this morning. I'm looking for an Ingrid Callum. I have reasons to believe she was among the last people to see those men alive, and I'd like to speak with her.
The man looked at the badge, then at Martin, then at Drew. He leaned down and set the rifle against the porch railing.
I'm George Callum. Ingrid's my wife. She's inside.
He pushed the door open and held it.
Come on in.
The interior was dim and smelled like wood smoke or something herbal. The furniture was mismatched, but not uncomfortable looking, and every flat surface held something. Candles or dried bundles of plants or small arrangements of stones and feathers. George led them to a dining table near the back of the main room and pulled up chairs.
Sit down. I'll go get her.
He disappeared down the hallway. Martin and Drew settled into their chairs, and a moment later, 2 boys appeared in the doorway to the dining room, the younger one half hidden behind his brother's shoulders. The older boy walked in and stood at the corner of the table with his arms at his side. "I'm David, and this is my brother, Henry." Henry raised one hand briefly in a wave.
Good to meet you both. I'm Martin. I'm here to talk to your mother for a little while.
David studied him with a directness that was unusual for a child his age. "Are you here to fight our dad?" Martin blinked.
No. Why would you think that?
Henry stepped out from behind his brother. "People show up a lot and they want to fight Dad. A lot of people don't like him," David added, in the tone of someone stating a simple fact. Martin kept his expression neutral.
Why would people want to fight your father?
"Because of Mom. The men see her and they want her, and they want to fight Dad to get her." Martin looked at Drew briefly, then back at the boys.
I see. And has anyone ever actually fought him?
David did not have to think about this. "Oh yeah, all the time. And Dad's very strong," Henry said, with evident pride.
Oh, I see. It's good to have a strong dad, isn't it? If you don't mind me asking, what did you boys get up to yesterday?
"The forest," Henry said immediately. "We were in the forest all day. We found a bear skull," David added. "A big one. We brought it back and put it in the woodpile."
Do you go far into the forest?
"Pretty far. We know all the trails."
Do you ever see other people out there? Hikers, hunters?
David shrugged. "Sometimes hunters come through in the fall, mostly."
Did you see any hunters yesterday?
David looked at Henry. Henry looked at the table. "No," David said. Martin nodded slowly.
Do you boys go to school in town?
"Mom teaches us here," Henry added.
What are you studying right now?
"Sums," Henry said, making a face. "And reading," David said. "Mom's been reading us old stories, old ones from before regular books."
Do you like them?
"Some of them are scary," Henry added, "but David likes the scary ones. And someone has to," David said without apology. Martin smiled faintly. He let the conversation rest for a moment and glanced down the hallway where George had disappeared. The house was quiet except for the sound of wind against the irregular roofline. Drew leaned slightly toward Martin and said, under his breath,
He's taken a long time.
He is.
He turned back to the boys.
David, Henry, would you mind going and telling your dad and your mom that we're ready when they are?
The boys looked at each other, then ran off down the hallway, with the particular thundering energy of children who have been sitting still longer than they wanted to. Their footsteps receded, a door opened somewhere, and the house went quiet again. Martin and Drew sat without speaking. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped against the window. A candle on the sideboard had burned low enough that its light barely reached the center of the table. After another 2 minutes, footsteps returned down the hallway, slower this time. George came in first. Behind him came Ingrid. She was, as the bartender had suggested, and as Bob Ellers had not quite found the words for, very striking. She was tall and dark-haired, with a kind of composed, unhurried quality in her movement that made the room seem to rearrange itself around her. She was wearing an ornate gypsy dress, flowing with beads and flowery laces. She met Martin's eye as she sat down across from him and did not look away. George sat beside her and folded his hands on the table. Martin opened his notepad.
Thank you both for making the time.
Martin clicked the recorder on and set it on the table.
Ingrid, I'd like to hear from you about last night. You were at Hannigan's bar and you spent time with 2 of the victims. Can you walk me through what you remember?
Ingrid opened her mouth, but was interrupted.
I killed them.
The room went still. Martin looked at him.
All 4 of them.
He was not agitated. His hands were still folded on the table. Martin reached over and picked up the recorder.
Mr. Callum, you're telling me you're responsible for the deaths of Carl Detman, Roy Detman, Phil Okafor, and Thomas Brightwell.
That's right.
I need you to tell me how, and I need you to tell me why.
George unfolded his hands and placed them flat on the table.
Well, the why is simple. Men like that, they come out from the city every year, and they walk into the forest like they own it. They don't even know its name. They don't know what lives in it. They don't know its importance in what's to come. They take from it and they leave, and they never think once about what they've taken from.
He paused.
The forest doesn't forget that, and I speak for the forest.
Martin kept his voice even.
And how, Mr. Callum?
I told the trees about them.
Martin looked at him for a long moment.
What does that mean?
It means I told the trees, and the trees took them out.
Drew had stopped writing.
Mr. Callow.
Martin said, catching the wrong name and correcting himself immediately.
Mr. Callum, you are telling me that trees killed 4 men?
I'm telling you I told the trees to do it, yes.
And the wounds on their bodies, trees did that by themselves?
The trees have many parts,
George said simply. Martin set the recorder down. He looked at Ingrid, who was sitting with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the surface of the table. She had not spoken a single word since entering the room. He looked back at George.
George Callum, I'm placing you under arrest for the murders of Carl Detman, Roy Detman, Phil Okafor, and Thomas Brightwell. You'll be coming back with us to be processed and charged. Do you understand what I'm telling you?
I understand. I'll go without any trouble.
Martin stood and drew his cuffs from his belt. George rose from his chair and turned around without being asked, placing his wrists together behind his back. Martin fastened the cuffs and checked them, and then took George by the arm and nodded to Drew. They came out through the front door into the gray afternoon light. Both cars were gone. Martin stopped walking. He looked at the space where the vehicles had been, at the unmarked dirt where the tires should have left clear impressions. There was nothing. No tracks leading away from the spot, no disturbed gravel, no oil marked on the ground. The Chrysler Windsor was gone as well. The dirt in front of the house was as smooth and undisturbed as a swept floor. Martin tightened his grip on George's arm.
Where are the cars?
George looked at the empty space with an expression of mild satisfaction.
The trees took them.
That is not an answer.
It's the only answer I have for you.
Drew was standing at Martin's shoulder, pointing out that there were no tracks.
I see it.
It's 40 miles to town. It'll be dark in 3 hours. We don't have food, we don't have water, we don't have a working radio out here, and our only vehicle is gone. What the hell is happening right now?
Drew, you need to calm down.
George began to laugh. It was a low sound, the laugh of a man who's found something privately amusing.
You're both gonna die out here. You understand that, right? You shouldn't have come. This is the forest grounds, and you're standing on it with a badge and a notepad, thinking that means something.
Martin stood in the silence for a moment, his hand still on George's arm, and turned the situation over with the same methodical patience he applied to everything. Walking 40 miles in the dark with a cuffed prisoner and a shaken apprentice was not viable. Staying at the house was equally untenable. The road back to Centralia was a single gravel track through dense forest, and they had no light source beyond what the cloud-covered sky would offer, which in another few hours would be nothing at all.
The hunting spot.
Martin said quietly, more to himself than to Drew. Drew looked at him.
What about it?
Bob marked it less than a mile from here. If those men drove out to that location this morning, there may still be a vehicle out there. Their truck, whatever they came in.
Drew blinked and then straightened slightly.
Bob said they drove out to the spot.
Martin looked at the road and then at the tree line, orienting himself against his memory of the map.
It's less than a mile. We can be there in 20 minutes. Proceeding on foot to the victim's vehicle location northeast of the Callum property. Prisoner George Callum in custody. Time, approximately 3 in the afternoon.
He released the button and looked at Drew.
Stay close. Don't walk off the road for any reason.
Drew nodded and said nothing, though his eyes moved briefly to the tree line in a way that suggested the instruction had landed with more weight than Martin had intended. George walked between them at an easy pace, as though the cuffs behind his back were of no more consequence than a loose jacket. The gravel crunched under their feet, and the firs pressed close on either side, their upper branches knitting together overhead into a ceiling that littered what remained of the afternoon light into something thin and colorless.
You both live in the city.
George said. It was not a question. Neither of them answered.
You've got your cars and your electric lights and your phones, all that wire strung between poles, all that concrete poured over the ground so you don't have to touch it.
He tilted his head slightly as he walked, as though he was listening to something in the trees.
Do you think that's progress? You think distance from the natural world is something you've earned?
Mr. Callum, you don't need to talk.
I know I don't. But you should hear this before it's over. There's something very old that has been watching what men have been building. Something that was here before the first stone was ever set. All this machinery, all this industry, all these cities spreading out across the land like a sickness, it's all been getting his attention, pulling his eyes towards us.
Drew kept his gaze on the road ahead.
The only answer is to go back, live with the trees, eat what the land offers, stop poisoning the ground and stringing wire through the sky. That's not primitivism. That's survival. That's the only thing that closes the eyes back up. Unfortunately, it's a little too late for that. The men I killed yesterday didn't understand that. They came into the forest with their guns to take from it, and they never once considered that the forest had an opinion about that.
And the forest's opinion required 4 men to be stabbed repeatedly and hung upside down from trees.
The forest isn't gentle. I never told you it was, but being killed by a tree is a particular kind of pain. There's nothing fast about it. The woods find the soft places.
He looked sideways at Martin with a kind of clinical interest.
You understand that soon enough. Both of you.
Drew said nothing, but Martin could hear the change in his breathing. Martin unfolded the map without slowing his pace and studied it as he walked. The gravel road continued another quarter-mile before the trail broke off to the right, cutting northeast through the forest toward the area that Bob had indicated. He could already see, as they rounded a slight bend, where the trail mouth opened between 2 large firs. And there, pressed into the soft earth at the trail's edge, were tire tracks. Wide set, heavy tread. A truck.
This is our turn.
Martin said, folding the map. Drew looked at the trail. The tree cover was immediate and dense, the path swallowed by shadow within 40 feet of the road.
I don't like it.
George looked at him.
You're right not to.
Don't do that.
He's right. The trail goes through the old growth. Those trees have been there longer than the state has existed. They know what I told them.
Drew had stopped walking. He was standing at the trail mouth, looking into it with his notepad held against his chest like a small shield.
Martin, what if he's telling the truth?
He's not telling the truth. He's a man in handcuffs who killed 4 people and is trying to frighten us into making a poor decision. The truck is down here. We need the truck.
What if it's not there?
Then we'll make another decision. Come on.
Drew looked at the trees for another moment, then stepped onto the trail behind him. George ran. He turned off the path to the left and simply bolted, straight into the forest, his cuffed arms locked behind his back, his body tilting forward at a sharp angle to compensate. He was fast, far faster than man in his position had any right to be, and within seconds, the dark green of his jacket was flickering between the trunks and then gone entirely. Martin was already moving. He got 3 strides into the trees before he stopped himself. The forest was very quiet. He stood still and listened. George's footsteps had already ceased. No cracking branches, no rustling undergrowth, nothing. The man had disappeared into the old growth as cleanly as the wildlife that called it home. Martin walked back to the trail. Drew was standing exactly where he had been, not having moved an inch.
Do we go after him?
Martin looked into the trees for a long moment.
Prisoner George Callum fled custody at approximately 3:15 on foot into forested area northeast of Centralia. Pursuit deemed inadvisable. We get to the truck, we drive back into town, we get a proper search team, and we come back with more people and more light.
He started down the trail without waiting for Drew's response. After a moment, Drew followed. They had been on the trail for perhaps 10 minutes when Martin stopped walking. Drew nearly walked into him. In the center of the path, occupying the full width of the trail between the flanking undergrowth, stood a fir tree. It was not a sapling, it was a mature tree, 3 feet across at the base, its bark deeply furrowed and dark with moisture. The tire tracks ran straight up to it on one side and continued straight away from it on the other. Martin crouched down and looked at the tracks on both sides. Same tread, same depth, same spacing, uninterrupted. He stood up and said nothing for a moment.
That tree couldn't have been there when the truck came through.
Drew took a step back.
No.
So either the truck went straight through it,
Or it moved.
I think we should go back to the Callum house. Wait there until someone comes looking for us.
George could be back at that house by now. He knows these woods, and we don't. If he's back there, he's back at his rifle. We'd be walking up to that drive with no vehicle and no cover.
He stepped around the base of the tree, testing the ground, then continued up the trail.
The truck is our only way out of here.
Drew looked at the tree for another moment, then followed. The creaking began a few minutes later. It started low, a single groan from somewhere off to the left, the sound of stressed wood, the sound a ship's hull makes in heavy water, then another from the right, then ahead of them, then behind. The canopy above began to move, slow and lateral, a swaying that had nothing to do with the wind because there was no wind. The air between the trunks was completely still. Martin kept his eyes on the trail and walked faster. Drew was at his shoulder now, no longer maintaining any professional distance, his breathing audible. The creaking deepened and multiplied until it was coming from every direction at once, a low wooden chorus that seemed to press in from the tree line on both sides. The trunk nearest the trail was visibly moving, a slow rocking, their root systems shifting the soil at their bases in small rhythmic upheavals. Martin's hand had found the grip of his holstered weapon without him consciously deciding to put it there. Then the tree line opened and they were in the clearing. Martin stopped. The truck was there. It was a blue Ford pickup, or it had been. The cab was collapsed inward as if something had closed around it from both sides with tremendous force. The windshield was gone. The roof had been pressed down to the level of the dashboard. The bed was split lengthwise, the metal peeled outward in long curling strips. One door was 30 feet away in the undergrowth, as though it had been pulled free and discarded. Deep parallel gouges ran across every surface, consistent with something serrated dragged slowly through steel. Drew made a sound that was not quite a word.
I was right.
He said, his voice climbing.
I told you this was wrong. I told you we shouldn't have come down that trail.
We'll go back.
Martin said. His voice was steady but quieter than usual.
You believe me now?
I believe we need to leave this location immediately.
He turned around. The trail was gone. Behind them was a forest, continuous, unbroken. The trunks standing close together with no gap between them, no path, no opening, no indication that anything had ever passed through it in either direction. The tree line where the trail mouth should have been was as solid and undifferentiated as a wall. Martin stood very still and looked at it. The creaking had stopped. The forest was perfectly silent. Drew was standing beside him and not speaking, which was in some ways worse than the panicking. Martin turned slowly in a full circle, trees in every direction, and between them the light was going, the overcast sky above the canopy darkening by degrees as the afternoon moved toward evening. He could not see more than 40 feet in any direction before the trunks and the shadow swallowed whatever lay beyond. The whisper came from everywhere and nowhere, threading itself out of the ambient silence the way a sound does when you cannot be certain it's real. It was at the periphery at first, a shape in the air rather than a sound, something that pressed at the edge of comprehension without quite resolving into language. Then, slowly, over the span of perhaps a minute, it found its form.
I am the speaker of the trees.
The words were quiet and slow.
The voice in the breeze.
The hair on Martin's neck stood up.
I command the leaves.
The words were sourceless.
And control what they believe.
Martin had his weapon out before he fully registered why. Drew was beside him with his own drawn. Both of them were facing the tree line where the whispers seemed loudest, where the shadows between the trunks had begun to shift and consolidate into something with a shape. George came out of the forest, walking slowly. His wrists were still cuffed behind his back. His lips were moving.
Stop. Stop right there.
George did not stop. Martin fired, then again. Drew fired twice beside him. The shots were very loud in the clearing. George continued walking. His expression did not change. His shirt showed nothing of the bullet's onslaught. Martin adjusted and fired again and again, methodical and controlled by the way he'd been trained. Drew was firing as fast as he could pull the trigger. Drew's weapon clicked dry. He kept pulling the trigger for a moment before he registered it. Then he lowered his gun and stood holding it at his side, his chest heaving. The creaking began again, and beneath it a whisper continued. And now the trees were moving, not swaying, moving. The root system at their bases were pulling free of the soil with sounds like tearing fabric, dense wet pops as the earth gave way and the trunks were walking, slow and grinding, the whole circumference of the clearing shrinking inward degree by degree. The root came from beneath Martin's left foot before he saw it. It punched up through the soil and curled around his boot. He tried to pull free and could not. Another found Drew's ankle, then his calf. The roots began burying themselves into the terrified man's flesh. More roots came. They thickened and pushed upward through the soles of their boots and began to move with terrible patience up through the layers. The ground around their feet was churning. Leaves stripped from the moving trees came in horizontal streams, spinning fast, their edges finding every exposed surface, the face and hands and neck, dozens of small cuts opening all at once, and then dozens more. Drew screamed. Martin screamed beside him. A sound pulled out of him without permission, the pain total and without interval. Martin looked at Drew. Drew's face was sheeted with blood from the leaves, and below his knees, the ground had swallowed him to mid-shin, the roots working upward. His eyes were wild with something beyond fear, something that had passed fear entirely and came out the other side into pure animal suffering. Martin raised the gun. He did not hesitate. The shot caught Drew right between the eyes. His suffering was over. Martin turned the gun to his own temple. He closed his eyes. The cylinder was empty. He pulled the trigger 3 more times into the silence, the mechanical click of the hammer falling on spent chambers, the only sound he could produce. George was standing in front of him, close enough to touch. He was smiling the same smile he had worn at the dining table.
There's no easy way out for you,
George said. Martin opened his mouth to scream in agony. The tree arrived from his left, a trunk that had walked itself to within arm's reach while he had been looking at George, and the branch came low and fast and wrapped around his neck. With a sickening pop, the branch pulled Martin's head free from his shoulders. The kitchen light was on when George came up the driveway, warm and yellow in the front window. Ingrid was standing at the door before he reached the porch steps. She looked at his face and knew.
How did it go?
It's done.
George said. He came up the steps and stood in front of her.
The sacrifice has been made. There's now only one left.
Ingrid's eyes filled with tears as she looked away from him, out towards the tree line. Her jaw worked for a moment before she spoke.
Is there any other way? George, please tell me, is there any other way at all?
There isn't.
I'm gonna miss you. The kids are gonna miss you.
She said, her voice coming out smaller than intended.
I'll still be here.
He put his hands on her arm gently.
I'll still be a part of the trees. The oldest ones especially. When the wind comes through them, you'll hear me. I'll do my best to watch over you and the boys. Over the house. Whatever I'm able to do from inside them, I'll do.
She looked at him then, directly, and did not look away.
The forest has to be protected. Once I'm gone, that falls on you. All of it. This land is not just our land, Ingrid. It never was. It's the key to all of it. If this forest falls, if they come with their machines, their wires, and their concrete, there's nothing left to hide from the old one. Do you understand that?
I understand.
Use the magic only if there's no other way. What I've done these past years, the attention it's drawn, that's part of why this has to happen now. Every time the power moves through that place, it pulls the gaze a little closer. You have to be still. Let the trees do their work quietly. Only call on the deep craft when everything else has failed.
And the boys?
Teach them what they have to know. Not everything at once. David is ready for more than you've given him. Henry will come to it in his own time.
He looked toward the front door and then back at her.
They're good boys.
They are.
George pulled her into him and held her with both arms, his chin resting on the top of her head. She gripped the back of his shirt and held on for a long moment, neither of them speaking. The night was very quiet around the house. The trees at the edge of the clearing stood without moving. Then he stepped back and held her face in his hands for a moment and kissed her.
Look after the forest.
He turned and walked down the porch steps, across the cleared ground toward the tree line, his footsteps quiet on the cold earth until his shape vanished beneath the trunks. She stood there for a long time after he disappeared, one hand resting on the doorframe, listening to the breeze rustling through the trees. When I turned 18 and moved off to college, I promised myself to never return home. I know it seems dramatic. The statement is one of those adolescent eye rolls, but I didn't make some public pledge like many others do just after they're dropped off at the dorms. It was a secret, and one I promised myself I'd keep. My parents wouldn't care or call if I never came back. They couldn't call, or email. They were old school. A euphemism for being belligerently stubborn to change. But with some of that stubborn blood in me, I figured I had a better chance of sticking to my promise. Of course, I did end up coming home. However, I hope you'll see that it was hard not to go back on my word. After all, it's not every day the county sheriff dogs your phone like a debt collector and begs you to drop everything to fly across the country. I didn't even pay for my plane ticket, the police department did. It hardly counts as coming home. You see, the occasion was that they found my family. Just after I left for college, my mom, dad, and sisters vanished into thin air. They had been missing for an estimated 6 years, though only 5 were confirmed, as it took the town the better part of a year to find out they were missing in the first place. Honestly, I'm a little surprised it didn't take longer. My parents were not friendly people. They weren't particularly mean either, but they didn't have friends and didn't make small talk. They barely even spoke to me. My sisters were older and still lived at home, but by the time I was in high school, they were hardly ever around. Ever since I left for college, there'd been no trace of them either. Their unnoticed disappearance was aided by the fact that my family lived on a secluded estate on the outskirts of town. It was an 11,000 square foot mansion surrounded by fields and connected to the country road by a quarter-mile driveway. It was an ugly, cruel-looking place built off gigantic blocks of brownstone. Despite being more labyrinth than home, when I was told their bodies had been found inside and were likely there all along, I couldn't speak. Hadn't investigators searched the house? Was there some kind of hidden room no one had known about? Even when they called telling me they'd found the bodies, I was reluctant to return. The sheriff gave me the disturbing details as gently as he could, and I drank throughout the conversation until those details got nice and blurry around the edges. He said if I wasn't going to come back home, to please provide them with the basics. A DNA swab, a written statement, anything that could help. I mailed everything I could in a manila envelope, content to wash my hands of the past, but my curiosity got the best of me and I folded. A few days after mailing everything, I kissed my girlfriend on the cheek and stepped into the security line at San Diego International Airport. Regardless if I returned home, the rumors were finding me across the country anyway. I was ignoring a dozen calls a day from old friends I had hoped to never hear from again. When the bodies were found and the investigation began, all the town gossip regarding my parents' initial disappearance was compiled. The townspeople agreed that my parents' car had disappeared the same week I moved out to go to college, but no one had seen them leave. Of course, it was unlikely that their single car departing in the night would be noticed by anyone. The only problem was that the house was empty. There were no furnishings, no china dishes, no wallpaper. Everyone agreed it would take a battalion of moving trucks to ferry away all the lamps and books and leather couches that house must have held. But there were no moving trucks. That would have been noticed. Could it have been emptied by thieves after they left, carrying one piece at a time? Perhaps, said the police. But the logistics of my parents' stuff didn't concern me. To be honest, when I found out they went missing this summer going into sophomore year, I felt relief. Now I really would never have to go home. The town didn't have an airport, and it would be more than an hour's drive from Cedar Rapids. Luckily, I was getting a ride, and I wasn't all that shocked when I was greeted at the terminal by every investigative agent in the county. Unsolved quadruple homicides are few and far between in the heartland. The sheriff stepped forward.
Sam.
He smiled somberly. Hey, Sheriff. From my turbulent youth, I knew Sheriff Caine personally. After 6 years away, I saw he had become an old man now, though still large and mustached. He told me after one of my worst nights that landed me in the little county cell that he was on a path to prison too, before getting sober decades before I was born. He shook my hand. I'd shaken it before when I was younger, as a deal between would-be degenerates to get my life together. It was firm then. Now his soft, sorry handshake sent shivers down my spine. I moved down the line of faces and shook hands with the county workers I knew from the other hats they wore in town. Coroner, Pope, my pediatrician, Officer Mann, my geography teacher. All their hands were limp and feeble on my own. I was the man with the dead family. I was the man made of glass.
Don't worry, son. No reporters, like I promised.
I nodded, and soon I was in the back of a police SUV racing across the plains at 90 miles per hour. It was a police escort. Lights flashing, oncoming traffic steered to the shoulder, the whole 9 yards. My parents were already dead, and as bad as it sounds, all I could think was, what's the rush? I understood it was important to find their killers as soon as possible, but while their bodies were found last week, they'd likely been dead since I moved out 6 whole years ago. The sun was setting when we rolled into town. and the SUV I was in pulled into the city's only motel while the rest kept driving.
We've already got your room.
The cop held a key card in between his fingers and I took it.
It's room 14. The police station is too small for the crowd we're having tomorrow. We're leading the investigation out of the community center on Pleasant Street. We're getting started at 9 a.m.
What are we doing here?
We're going over everything we know, starting from scratch. We can pick you up, or
He nodded his head down the block.
you can walk. It's 5 minutes from here.
I remember, thanks.
And don't worry, no press is allowed in. If anyone bugs you, or if there's anything you need, you just call Caine. And Sam. I'm sorry about all this.
Yeah, again, thanks. I grabbed my small duffel and went to my room. Inside, I looked around briefly. The motel was cleaner than what I'd pictured the countless times I'd driven by it growing up. The room was cold, and the blackout curtains were drawn. I kept them closed and laid on the bed in the dark. Here I was, home again. I thought about going to the liquor store and getting drunk so I could sleep, but thought better of it. I didn't want to deal with the details of my dead family hungover. Instead, I stared at the stucco ceiling and thought, that was a bad idea. I rose in an existential panic a few minutes later and paced the room. I couldn't be alone. I unlocked my phone. I still had a few friends in town and called my closest one, Jake. He picked up on the first ring.
Sam!
Hey, Jake.
I've been thinking of calling. Really. I'm sorry. I thought you had enough on your mind.
Man, I'm the one who left and never called. I'm the one who should feel guilty.
Well, what's up?
I just got into town.
I heard you were coming.
You trying to go on a night walk? Jake and I had this thing in high school where when there was nothing to do, often as that was, we'd roam the town and country roads, talking and drinking for miles.
Dude,
Jake spoke as if dumbfounded by coincidence.
I literally just left the liquor store.
I met him outside my motel room not 20 minutes later, and he awkwardly hugged me with a six-pack in one hand.
Man,
Jake placed one of his massive palms on my shoulder and leaned back.
did you get shorter?
Nah, you somehow got even taller, you circus freak.
See, I didn't move away. I kept eating corn and drinking milk. Do they even have dairy on the West Coast, or are you some kind of almond milk freak now?
What's it like being so tall and stupid?
Boy, is it nice.
He smiled.
No girl has ever expected me to find the clit, and oh boy, do I get praised like a dog when I do.
You're telling me the townie girls finally developed a fetish for old Frankenstein?
Once you left, I was the prime entree, my friend.
He playfully tapped my leg with the six-pack.
So where are we walking to?
You're not gonna like it. His happy expression dropped.
You don't want to go there, do you?
Yeah, I do. Just to see it. We can't go inside. It's a crime scene anyway. He cracked a beer and started drinking.
Okay,
He sighed and looked towards the direction of my old house.
I can do that.
By the time we were walking on the shoulder of the country highway, it was already dark. We spent most of the way there talking about mutual acquaintances in town. The topic of the murders had been avoided until then. After a silence between topics, Jake downed another beer and tossed the bottle into the weeds. I stopped and pointed. You're really still doing that?
What?
Tossing your beers in the ditch. We're not 18 anymore, man.
You've got some weird priorities right now.
I shook my head and kept walking. It was late summer, and the sounds of crickets in the grass gave the air a sleepy feel that made the silence we shared easy. We were almost to the house when Jake cleared his throat.
So, you don't have to talk about any of this stuff with me if you don't want to, but I've been hearing the craziest rumors.
Yeah?
Yeah. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I nodded at my feet.
That's all just bull, right? The things these farm wives can come up with. Stranger than fiction.
I didn't say anything. My old childhood home had come into view. There were no lights on, and in the dark, its silhouette was outlined sinisterly.
They're just rumors, right, Sam?
There was fear in his voice, and while I heard him perfectly, I still couldn't bring myself to speak as I watched the house in the distance.
Sam?
I looked at him. Those farm wives actually put it all together pretty well. Even in the black, I could see his face blanch.
You're messing with me?
I shook my head. Jake yanked a beer from the pack and twisted off the cap.
I'm so sorry, Sam.
He tilted his head back and drank deeply. Everyone in town is. Jake finished his beer with a burp, but this time he put it back into the cardboard six-pack. As soon as he did, he pulled out another, and I couldn't help but smile. Afraid? Jake nodded as he put the new bottle to his lips. I suppose we should be scared. Come on. The gate will be locked, but if we cut through this field, we can get close. I started walking, giving Jake little time to protest. We crossed the field and stepped over the property line where soybeans turned to weeds. The house never had a lawn, at least that I can remember. My parents never cut the grass, and apart from the driveway, most of the property was overgrown with prairie. We got within 30 feet of the house before we stopped in waist-high grass. Jake reached behind his back and pulled out a pint he'd pinned to his belt. I heard him crack the plastic cap, drink, and smelled the whiskey as he passed me the little bottle. I took a long pull. The air glugged back several times before I lowered the pint and sucked air noisily through my teeth to steady my stomach.
Why would you ever want to come back here?
I ignored his question. This liquor reminds me of how the water here always tasted. Like crap. All this grandeur, and it couldn't beat the tap water from a trailer park. Jake said nothing. Do you remember when this place burned?
I would have been your age when that happened. I heard about it.
I could see where the coral-colored stone was stained with soot from when the flames licked from the windows. It burned the week we moved in, just a few days after, apparently. The entire interior had to be rebuilt. I was 2 or 3. I don't remember a thing, but my family never treated me the same afterwards. Growing up, I thought the fire was somehow my fault. Even if I did hold a candle to the drapes, who blames a baby? Or holds a grudge, at least. But my parents... I frowned. Well, they seemed like the kind of people who would do that, didn't they?
Can I just say it?
I felt I read his thoughts and smiled. Sure. He exhaled in relief.
I know you weren't close, but God, those folks gave me the creeps. I met them twice and couldn't sleep both nights.
I shrugged. No hard feelings.
Your sisters, too. I'm glad they weren't in our grade.
Yeah.
Were you close with your sisters?
No, not really, but they were normal to me. Jake nodded and took another swig. He wiped his mouth with his hand and patted my back.
Sam?
Yeah?
Can we get out of here?
Yeah. I laughed, but just then, our attention was taken to the road, where gravel crunched under something heavy. It took a second to make it out in the dark, but an enormous object crept towards us. Suddenly, we were blinded, and we squinted through our faces towards the dark.
Hey! Oh, damn.
Jake was already pounding away through the brush.
Cops!
I stood still. Jake, get back here! That's our ride! I saw the outline of the officer get out of the car.
Did you hear me? You there. You're trespassing. I thought we made it clear to all you kids that this place was under 24-hour watch, and that any more trespassers will be prosecuted. No buts.
Sorry, I haven't been here in a while.
Did you hear me? No buts. Sheriff said to prosecute the next teens dumb enough to mess around this place, to send a message.
That can be us.
Kid, I don't want to book you. You a Royals fan?
No.
Well, it's the 11th inning, and I ain't missing a pitch. Now your friend there has got the right idea. You go on now and run for the police.
I started walking closer. I was thinking maybe a ride for old time's sake.
Huh?
He squinted and stepped further from the car.
Oh. Sam?
How you doing?
Sam?
He said in disbelief and looked at the house.
What are you doing here?
Remembering, for whatever it's worth. I raised my arms and let them smack to my sides.
I'm sorry.
He looked me over as if he were looking for something he hadn't seen when I used to live there.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, don't worry about it. You can't bring people back from the dead anyway. He shook his head to clear it.
So that must have been the big guy.
He pointed into the prairie.
I thought I saw a glimpse of a Sasquatch when I hit those brights.
Yeah. Jake, get out here. We were both silent as we listened to the grass rustle. There was a distant shout.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you want to walk back to town? I turned to the officer. You don't mind giving me a ride back to the motel?
No, of course not. Anything.
Thanks. Come on, Jake. We watched Jake stand and tower over the grass. In just a few steps, it seemed like he covered 100 feet and stood next to us.
Hey, Officer Cooper.
I should have known. Was it his idea to come out here?
He pointed at Jake.
God, no.
Jake wasn't paying us any attention as he brushed dirt off his plastic pint.
This scaredy cat?
I walked closer to the squad car.
Can we drink in the car?
Jake wiggled the whiskey.
Jake, you don't even fit in my cruiser. We've been over this. I'm taking Sam, but you can walk.
I told you that's just if you're stuffing more than one guy in the back. Sam rides shotgun, then I'll fit.
The cop waved dismissively and got into the driver's seat. When we started up the drive, there was still the comfortable sound of baseball on the radio. With the strong voice of the announcer and the soft cheering and chattering of thousands of fans behind him, it was hard to feel any fear. I pictured the stadium, the millions of bugs whirling under the lights, the tired kids leaning against their nervous fathers with fingers sticky from cotton candy, ready to go to bed. I managed to forget where I was and smiled.
So,
Officer Cooper turned off the radio and broke the silence.
Sam, I've been hearing all sorts of rumors running around.
I leaned my head into my hand and closed my eyes. He picked at his collar.
That's all just bull, right?
When I woke in the morning, I considered it a good thing that I was still drunk and not hungover. Jake and I had gotten dropped off at the liquor store and walked back to my motel. I don't remember much of the night, but at some point, Jake had left because the other bed was empty. One of the deputies had given me a wake-up call at 8, and I showered, drank a couple of warm beers to keep the buzz going, and dressed. I walked to the community center. Some press was set up with their satellite trucks in front of the building. Sheriff Caine had been on the lookout for me when I was getting close, worrying I'd be recognized. He led me around the block and through the back. I was ushered into a medium-sized event room with 3 long tables forming a horseshoe, and they sat me at the center. At the end of the room on a cart was a big black Panasonic where our reflections fish-eyed in the dark glass. Every seat in the room was already full, and based on the empty paper cups of coffee that many officials had in front of them, it looked like this conference had started an hour or more earlier. A woman in a suit stood as I sat. She wore her hair up, and I glanced at the pistol bulging on her hip.
Mr. Martin.
Please, I said quickly. Sam is fine.
Of course. I'm sorry.
She smiled at me pityingly.
Sam, thanks for coming. We can't imagine what this must be like. And before we get started, I want to make clear that we can stop whenever you like if you need to take a break.
That's fine.
Okay. My name is Casey Allen, and I'm the lead investigator on this case with the state PD. You're going to be hearing from a lot of people today.
She turned to the table to her right and pointed.
We have Richard Pope, the Clayton County coroner.
He lifted his hand from the table in a weak wave.
Greg Meyer, our fire marshal until 2012. And Sophia Mendez and Rick Wheeler are here from the University of Iowa, where they specialize in forensic pathology. I understand you must have a lot of questions. And, of course, we have a lot for you.
I kept trying to make eye contact with those she introduced, but they only tightly smiled and awkwardly flipped through the papers in front of them.
I think it's best we get this over with right away so we can get started in earnest. If you want to adjourn for a while, that will be totally fine.
She looked into my eyes, and I was glad to finally return a gaze.
I'm so sorry, Sam. Your DNA results came back last night with a 99.9% chance for both paternity and maternity.
The room was silent while they stared at me. I inhaled audibly and sighed for a long time. I figured as much.
Right. We've been told that you talked on the phone before coming here with Sheriff Caine about the circumstances surrounding the bodies.
I remember the call, but not the details. I'd gotten so drunk during it that the only thing that remained in my memory was some hint of a horrible thesis. I was drunk then in that stuffy community center, and feeling like a child enough already, I didn't want to seem any more ignorant. I leaned forward as if to speak into a microphone, even though there was none. That is correct. It felt like the entire room exhaled. People nodded, and Casey smiled.
Okay, we're going to take everything back a bit now. Can we start with where you moved from? We're pulling records, but it's bureaucratic and going to take some time.
My family had moved here from Massachusetts, a small town there, something port.
Newburyport?
Yeah.
And do you remember who told you that?
No.
Do you remember living there?
I would have been 2 or something. No.
Maybe we should start at your first memory. Do you have any idea what that may be, Sam?
I squinted, remembering the feeling of heat on my face. I do. I saw my childhood home burning in the night. I remember the fire.
Are you referring to when your home burned in 2001?
Yes.
That's great. That's a really great place to start. Greg here was the fire marshal then, and one of the first on the scene.
Casey gestured to Greg, but he stayed sitting. When she kept her arm extended, he realized he was being called on and stood.
Hi, Sam.
He turned on the television and hit some buttons, and static filled the screen.
Some of you may remember David Child. He was a teenager at the time of the fire, and perhaps a pyromaniac. He liked to follow the department around and film fires. Luckily, he made it out there when the Martin home burned. I've got the tape here.
He hit play, and there we were. It was beautifully shot. My parents stood with their backs to the camera, and my little sisters were standing at their feet. All of them stood stoically still as they watched the home burn in the night. They held a toddler in their arms. Me, I realized, and smiled.
Now this video is just 7 minutes of this. See? There's no hydrants out there, and the fire was already so progressed that there wasn't much to do anyway but let it burn out. But,
I frowned as the fire marshal stuttered and his voice began to get nasally with tears.
I found you that night, Sam. Just after we pulled up. I found you wandering around the outskirts of the fire all by yourself. Of course, your folks had just moved in that week. No one had ever met them. I didn't know what they looked like.
He pinched his nose and squinted.
I was carrying you around thinking your folks were dead in the fire, when suddenly I saw those people staring at the flames. I swear they hadn't been there before, but it was dark and a little hectic. They must have been waiting under those cottonwoods. I brought you over them.
He paused, trying to compose himself, and sobbed.
I put you in their arms.
I was angry at his guilt. I should be the one crying. I should be the one who gets to break down. Casey saw my scowl and patted the fire marshal's shoulder. She gestured to his chair, and he sat.
I'm sorry, Sam. The marshal got a little ahead of what you know. Based on the unignited accelerant found on the bodies and the carbon dating, we believe that the night of the fire was likely the first contact you and anyone in this town made with the suspects.
Suspects? I thought and frowned.
Sam? Are you with us?
I'm not sure. The room quietly wheeled. Everyone looked at one another and shifted in their folding chairs.
Sam, I'm sorry, but I'm going to need to know you're following this 100%. I believe you said Sheriff Caine explained the situation when he called.
I don't remember. Casey hesitated, but then spoke firmly.
The bodies found in the home that the DNA identified as your biological parents have been there for more than 2 decades.
I said nothing.
The lead suspects in the case are the people that raised you. We believe they may be responsible for the murder of your birth mother and father.
Where were they found? I heard myself suddenly say.
Your biological parents?
Yes. Somehow the others in the room grew even more uncomfortable.
Your parents were found in the basement. In the water cistern, specifically.
In the water cistern. I paused. It's used for storage? The fire marshal covered his mouth, and we all watched him speedwalk from the room before Casey continued.
No. It's the main source for the home.
I said.
I want to emphasize that the water was very cold year-round. The bodies were surprisingly well preserved and never entered into advanced decomposition.
I couldn't speak anymore. I stared in shocked horror at the TV screen. The video was still playing, and I watched as the woman's hair fluttered in the wind. She held me in her arms as the fire flickered beautifully in front of her. So, who were these people that didn't mind the taste of rotting flesh in the tap water? Who waited in the windbreak for my family to go to sleep before murdering them in the night, only to vanish after raising me for 16 years?
Sam?
In that moment, I felt nothing but a terrible clarity that whoever they were, I was going to stop at nothing until I found out. But the answers I found were so insidious, I only wish now I'd run from the room.
Sam, we need to know you're following everything. Would you like a break?
No. I pictured my parents floating in the cistern and bit my tongue to keep from crying. I understand. You finally found my family. When I stepped out of the community center into the alley around noon, it was sweltering. We had never adjourned. I'd spent the last 3 hours giving every shred of information I could about the people that raised me. I don't know what to call them. Thing 1 and Thing 2, Mom and Dad, whoever they were. After scouring my memory, I was certain they'd never said anything about grandparents or other family elsewhere in the country. They never suggested moving, and we'd never even gone on vacation. I had no leads on where they might have vanished to. Detective Casey said they were still searching the house for any DNA and were asking around town for 6-year-old surveillance footage to hopefully get some pictures, but that was it. There was little to go off. It seemed incredible that these people could raise me for as long as they did and leave so little evidence of who they were. They had gone by my parents' names, William and Lisa, and used my parents' social security number and bank accounts. They had taken their lives and, in the process, scrubbed any evidence of who they actually were. The police had confirmed my biological parents were real. They had shown me photos of them and had their birth, tax, and driver's license records from Massachusetts, but I didn't want to know about them. I didn't want to know about the normal life and loving parents I was supposed to have. When I was excused from the room, the police told me they were going to let the media know about the age of the bodies and the DNA results. Standing in the alley, I heard the roar of reporters from the other side of the building as the news broke. I was asked to come back to the community center for more questioning at 2 p.m. In the meantime, I was heading back to my motel room for a liquid lunch. When I got to the mouth of the alley, a woman was standing alone on the sidewalk staring at me. She wasn't all that old, but her face was heavily wrinkled and her hair frayed wildly.
Sam? Sam Martin?
She took a timid step towards me. She didn't look like she was the news, but I figured her as some amateur true crime chaser.
I'm not a reporter. Oh, you must be Sam. You have the same eyes of that baby. Sam.
Her eyes were misty.
I'm your aunt. I'm your biological mother's sister.
I'm sorry, but I'm a little skeptical about familial relations these days. If you think I'm your nephew, you can give a DNA sample to the police.
I can do that, of course, but please, just look.
She pulled a picture from her pocket and held it out to me. It was creased with a cross from being folded into a square. I squinted. In the picture was a baby, held by a much younger version of the woman I saw before me. But sure enough, smiling next to us were the faces of my biological parents. As relieved as I was for a lead, I was mourning the delay of my liquor. I took her into the community center with me, and the 2 p.m. meeting was moved to that second. My aunt's name was Sharon. She said after my parents had moved from Massachusetts, she never heard from them again. She was sitting to my right as she told the story.
William and Lisa were busy people, so not hearing from them didn't set off any alarm bells at first. But after about 6 months, Lisa still wasn't returning my calls. I had promised my sister I'd visit anyway, so I bought a plane ticket.
Casey was standing in front of the room and looked at Sharon gravely.
And William and Lisa. Did they say why they moved?
Sharon frowned.
No, they never said. Or maybe I never asked. They had a lot of money from William's father, and I was told his family was from the Midwest. Why exactly they chose to move here, I don't know. I only spoke with Lisa a couple times a year,
So what happened when you came to visit?
Well, I got a rental car and drove all the way to their new address. Their car was in the driveway, which I remember gave me some relief. But when I knocked on the door, the man that answered wasn't William. I said, "I'm looking for the Martin family," and he said, "Speaking." I said, "You're not William Martin," and he just smiled. He didn't say anything else. He just kept this big, creepy smile on his face, and he slammed the door.
Did you notify the police?
Of course. I sped into town and pounded on that police station door. I told them everything I just told you. They looked at me like I was crazy. A cop followed me out there and spoke to that man, but said I need some evidence for my accusations. They asked me if I could provide documents or the driver's licenses of the Martins. I said not that minute, but I could eventually. I flew home to gather everything I could. I mailed it to the police station here, but that was the last I heard of it.
Sheriff Caine frowned, leaned back, and glared at Sharon.
Do you remember who the officer was? Did you ever call again to follow up?
Sharon looked uncomfortable.
That man.
She pointed to the sheriff.
It was him. And no.
Casey glanced at the sheriff for a moment before continuing.
Why didn't you contact anyone again?
Because there was something wrong with the whole thing, because to be honest, it felt like one big conspiracy. Like they knew the Martins weren't who they said they were. I had the feeling if I came back here raising hell, that the next person to knock on my door looking for me would be greeted by some smiling creep calling herself Sharon.
So that's it. You left it at that. No further inquiries to any law enforcement agency.
No.
Sheriff Caine.
Casey had turned to him.
Do you remember these events?
Caine never took his gaze off Sharon.
Sheriff.
It's lies. Every word this woman's saying. Casey, you're from Des Moines, so maybe you're not familiar with the crime around here, but it's few and far between. If 15 years ago some lady came here saying the new creepy family wasn't who they said they were, I'd remember. The whole town would. None of this ever happened.
Everyone was looking at Sharon.
It did.
She leaned back and looked fearfully around the room.
It did happen.
Perhaps it was that nothing could shock me after that morning's news, or that the booze was finally leaving my system, but either way, I was apathetic to Sharon's arrival. I felt like the spectator of a soap opera and excused myself from the room. Before I left, they asked me if I'd stay in town while Sharon's DNA results were being processed. I agreed and told them to call if there were any worthy developments, and went back to the motel. The rest of the day, I don't remember much. I drank alone in the motel with the blinds drawn, and to be frank, my clearest thoughts were spent contemplating whether or not to end my life. The next day when I woke up, I spent the only 10 minutes of sobriety I had to return one of my girlfriend Liz's dozens of missed calls. I had to talk her into canceling the flight she'd booked when she hadn't heard from me but heard the news. I told her I was okay. I told her I'd be back in a day, maybe two. None of it was true. I suppose I was on some kind of suicide watch since the deputy would knock on my door twice a day to ask if I needed anything. I hated being watched over. Their ever-present concern made me feel like a child. The second night there, I turned off my phone, slipped out of my room, and went to crash on Jake's couch. I must have drank the shock out of my system, because the next morning, I woke up without the urge to grab a beer from the fridge. The burning curiosity I had felt in the community center was back. I couldn't just drink the rest of my life away because I had a great excuse to do so. When Jake woke and came downstairs, I was sitting at his kitchen table. It took half an hour of convincing, and for Jake to drink about 6 breakfast beers in that time, but that night, he was coming with me to my old house. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the cistern. Jake's eyes were glassy as he stared into space.
Why can't the police take you? I'm sure they show you around the scene.
Because what fun is that?
Okay. Are you sure it has to be tonight? We could always put it off for a day and hang out.
It's got to be tonight, I smiled. The Royals play the White Sox at 7. We waited for it to get dark before we took Jake's car to a country road just 2 miles from the house. We parked and sat out across the soybean fields. There were no stars, and in the country dark, we didn't even bother crouching when cars passed. It was quieter that night. No crickets, just the sound of soybeans rustling against our legs and Jake's handle of rum glugging in his backpack. Did you need to bring half a gallon of liquor?
Hey man, did you want to go alone?
We stopped as he tossed his backpack around and pulled out the bottle. I stood with my hands on my hips as he sipped. As I looked into the distance, my hair shot on end and tears welled in my eyes. A quarter mile away, where a tree line met the field, a figure stood staring at us. I could just make out their shadow against the trees. There's someone watching us. Jake choked on the rum and started coughing.
Not funny.
Not joking. He put an enormous hand on my shoulder and stood behind me as if I were a shield.
Where?
I pointed and he followed my finger. As I stuck my arm out, the figure turned and stepped calmly into the copse. What the? I turned and kept walking.
Sam, we gotta get out of here.
It's probably just a reporter.
You don't believe that.
You're right, I don't, but okay. I nodded my head the way we had come. You're free to walk back to the car alone. He held the giant bottle of rum in both hands and drank.
Screw this. And screw you.
It was easy to get into the house. Officer Cooper's car was parked far up the driveway towards the road, and we slipped through the glassless window on the first floor. Inside was pitch black, but to avoid being spotted, we couldn't use flashlights until we were in the basement. I reached out to find the wall and pictured the way to the basement door. Okay, I know the way downstairs. Stay right behind me. I got to the basement door quickly and turned on my flashlight at the entrance. The damp stairs creaked, and we could hear each other's hearts as we crept down into the dark. Thankfully, the basement was one giant unfinished hole in the ground, meaning there wasn't a labyrinth of room like the floors above. There was little space for anything to hide and pop out at us. In the center of the crumbling concrete floor lay the entrance to the cistern. It was open, and the giant metal lid lay upside down next to it. When I saw the lid, I blanched. I suddenly remembered I had tried to lift it as a child, just to see if I could. Of course, it was too heavy. I felt like crying as I pictured myself as a little boy, heaving with all my might on the handle, too little to lift it, too little to reveal the truth. I heard liquor sucked from the bottle behind me and shook my head as I walked to the mouth of the open hole. It'd been drained, and a long aluminum ladder descended into its depth. The light of the flashlight seemed to barely touch the bottom, but I could see that the cistern was a cylinder lined with brick. I'm going in there, I said, turning to Jake.
What?
He fumbled, putting the bottle back in his bag.
You got a scuba suit?
It's drained.
I can't let you. As your friend, Sam.
He started stumbling.
Has some sense. You'll drown.
It's empty, Jake. There's no water.
I'll save you.
I turned back to the hole. I heard him stumble towards me, and then came a thundering thump from the floor. I flinched and threw myself around. I shined the light on Jake. A cloud of dust was still scrambling up from where he'd fallen. Lying flat and face down on the floor, the length of his body was comically long. You okay, buddy? Jake? Before I stepped toward him, I heard a soft snore. Okay, that's probably for the best. I put my flashlight in my teeth and started down the ladder. It was an unstable descent, and I kept my eyes on my hands. At the bottom, my sneakers sucked in the mud. I shined the light around and froze. There were words scribbled into the brick wall, symbols, thousands of them. I slowly brought the light up the wall, and my eyelids reeled in fear. Scrawled across the bricks, with its star point stretching several feet, was a pentagram. This was not discussed in the meeting. I walked to the wall, a slurp of mud echoing up the cylinder. The water had worn the stone, but by reading slowly and tracing my finger in the carvings, I could make sense of it. Our son Sam. A star fell the night you were born, as beautiful as our baby boy. You can't imagine our delight when we were told that star was your soul. We believe we were told the truth. We believe we were giving you the world, Sam. We only wish to serve by your side. Your eternal servants, Mom and Dad. We love you. I stepped back from the wall with my mouth agape. Mom and Dad. Did my real parents write this? I looked around frantically. Every word carved into the cistern was the same message repeated over and over again. The word stretched up its entire length. It must have taken weeks. I stumbled backwards to the ladder and climbed it in a panic. Jake, wake up! He lifted his face off the floor and squinted. I turned my phone on for the first time in a day. I had messages from the sheriff, from Liz, but then I frowned. The coroner had texted me, urging me to call. Jake, we have to go upstairs.
Oh, God. Are we still in the spooky house?
Not for long. I went over and helped him up. He reached for his backpack, but I yanked out the bottle and hurled it to the wall where it shattered. He paused for a second and mocked.
Hey, man, we're not 18 anymore.
Come on. I stumbled back up the stairs with Jake's immense weight halfway on my shoulders. Back on the first floor, I shrugged him to the ground and I called the coroner. It was late and I'd hoped he'd kept his ringer on. He answered on what would have been one of the last rings.
Sam!
Hey, I know everyone's been calling me. I'm fine. I just needed a break from it all.
Yeah, we figured as much. But have you heard my report?
No, I saw your text.
Right.
I heard him sigh as he rose from bed.
Sam, I know this may sound even stranger, and trust me, I doubled and triple checked everything. I came to this conclusion a few days ago, and I really took my time to make sure.
What?
Sam, your biological parents' wounds are self-inflicted. There were no defense markings. The cuts down their arms were sure and steady.
But those bodies are so old.
Cold water is a coroner's best friend. I'm sure about this, and there was a note of sorts at the scene.
You mean the satanic stuff?
They told you?
Yeah, something like that. He didn't respond, and I brought the phone down from my ear. I've got to go. I hung up and stared into the dark. I listened to my ears ring, but suddenly I flung my face to the ceiling. There were footsteps coming from the floor above, slow and searching, creaking down the length of the hall.
Sam,
shh! I craned my neck to look down the hall and out the front window. I saw the taillights of the police cruiser as it turned onto the road and drove away. The footsteps continued and my eyes widened as I realized where they were headed. They were headed towards the stairs. The footsteps were descending now. I could hear the stair treads crack and pop as they were met with the weight. Jack stood mumbling.
Out of here,
he said, and threw himself out the first floor window where his limp body whacked into the weeds. I stayed inside. I walked as calm as I could into the foyer that grand staircase accordioned into. She was waiting for me at the foot of the stairs. It was Sharon.
You've read your parents' note.
She smiled and wiped away what must have been tears of joy.
Isn't it beautiful?
I shivered and said nothing.
You want to know if it's true, don't you?
I don't care. You're just another one of those creeps.
But you do, Sam. How could any person with a hint of curiosity in their bones not want to know?
We were both silent for a moment before she spoke.
I know where they are.
The creatures that raised me?
They're just people, Sam. Your people. All of us are. You are the one with the chance to become something more.
Well, unlucky for you. I never want to see those people again.
They very much want to see you.
She stepped forward and extended a small leather notebook.
This will tell you how to get there.
She wiggled it, and finally I snatched it out of her hand.
Good, Sam. Go get some rest. It's half a day's drive.
She started walking to the front door, and I shouted after her. Hey, wait! She stopped. So all that stuff you said in the meeting about coming back here and filing police reports, it was all a lie?
You have to excuse the townspeople. You see, they're all very excited for your return.
And with that, she left. I stood there for a minute and leafed through the leather notebook. The direction stopped at the entrance of an old logging road in the forests of western South Dakota. The Black Hills, the land of Mount Rushmore and motorcycles, and now, at least in my mind, satanic cults. Fun. I stuffed the book into my pocket and went back to the window Jake had dove from. He wasn't lying in the weeds below. "Jake?" I called out to the fields and stayed silent for a response. When none came, I dropped down. I thought Jake had previously tried to make a break for the car, but got lost in the dark. I called his name as I walked, and listened for the sound of snores, but all I could hear were crickets. He had the keys anyway, and I was sure he would wake up in the morning after having bed down for the night somewhere in the soybeans. I walked back to town, and the moment my face hit the cold sheets of my motel bed, I slept. As soon as I woke, I threw everything I had left in the motel room together and walked to Jake's. His car was outside, which surprised me, and I frowned as I knocked on the door. There was no response, but it was unlocked. I went inside. The house was little more than 1,000 square feet, and it didn't take long to figure out that he wasn't there. I packed up my things and called a cab from Cedar Rapids to pick me up and bring me back there. I was going to rent a car. I was going, against all my better judgment, to the Black Hills. The cab would take more than an hour to arrive, and I sat waiting on Jake's porch, both for the cab and for any sign of him. I had been nodding off with my head on the porch beam when I heard brakes squeak as a car stopped. It was the sheriff.
Hey, Sam.
"Hey." I stood and looked both ways down the block. A few curtains flashed in the neighbors' houses. How long had they been watching me?
I know you were at your old place last night.
Who told you that?
Well, the coroner says you called him. He says you knew about the writings your folks left. Not a lot of people know that.
Maybe someone told me. Maybe I wasn't there.
Well, I went by there this morning and found a big old bottle of liquor smashed in the basement that wasn't there the last time I was. I stopped at the liquor store and asked that clerk Cody if he'd sold any handles of Sailor Jerry's recently. And that's not to mention all that cistern mud still caked on your sneakers.
He pointed at my feet.
You boys aren't as smooth as you think.
I crossed my arms. Why didn't you tell me about the writings?
Sam, isn't it obvious?
He took a step towards me.
Let's not play this game. When I met you at the airport, you were drunk. When you came to the meeting, you were drunk. Every time you opened that motel room door, do you think the deputy couldn't see the bottles behind you? We're worried about you, kid. In this case, your situation, you want my honest take?
I said nothing.
It's insane. One bite at a time, that's how we're going to break it to you. What's the point of telling you about that satanic nonsense if we didn't even know who wrote it?
I felt doubt subdue my paranoia. I'm sorry, but Officer Cooper...
What about him?
When I was in the house last night, he left, as if he wanted me to find the truth.
Oh, come on. It's Coop. He was probably going to get more cigarettes. Sam, we're here to serve you.
My head snapped up and I took a step back. What?
We're here for you.
To serve me?
Huh? Sam, it says it on the squad car.
He pointed to the cursive Protect and Serve decal. Just then, he saw my cab turn onto the block, and I hurried past him to meet it. The cab came to a stop, and the trunk latch popped. The sheriff never asked me where I was going, and I didn't plan to tell him. I threw my duffel in the trunk and opened the back door.
You'll understand, Sam.
I paused and looked at the sheriff over my shoulder, and he smiled.
I promise, son. This will all be okay.
I got to Cedar Rapids just after noon and wasted no time getting a rental. By 1 p.m., I was driving west across the length of Iowa. My phone said I'd arrive at a lake, the closest landmark to the entrance of the logging road mentioned in the directions just after 11 p.m. I was an hour away from reaching Sioux City when I realized someone was following me. A brown pickup had been in my rear view for far too long, and I stopped to top off my tank, even though I hardly needed it. The truck sped past when I pulled into the gas station, but I couldn't get a good look at the driver. When I got back on the empty highway, there was no sign of the pickup, but after 20 more minutes on the road, I saw it in my rear view, only further away this time, trying to be more hidden. It must have been waiting down a country road for me to pass. I was going to confront whoever it was, but as I began to slow, I saw another car start to overtake the pickup in the opposite lane. It was almost too far away for me to understand what I saw. The car swerved violently into the pickup, sending it spinning into the ditch and disappeared in the cornfield. I slammed on my brakes and turned the rental around. By the time I got to where the collision had happened, the other car was long gone. I saw nothing but a slight shimmer of sun on its glass as it raced away. There were no other cars around, and I left mine running in the road while I got out and walked to the wreckage. The corn stalks were combed to the earth where the truck had rolled over them, and 40 feet from the ditch, the pickup sat upside down, one of its wheels still spinning as smoke rose from the engine. I crept cautiously toward the cab. It was an old truck, a 70s square body with no crumple zones, and the metal was twisted horribly. I bent down while still several feet away. The thick scent of leaking diesel deterred me from getting any closer. I froze. Inside the cab was the contorted corpse of the sheriff. His dead eyes stared back at me. I stood and looked around. Wind whistled in the cornstalks and played with the smoke. There was no one else around. It would take a half hour for first responders to even get there, and then what? Even though I knew the car that took him off the road was gone, I still felt like I was being watched. I walked back to my car and got in. Was the sheriff trying to help me? And who ran him off the road? Sharon? After all, I thought as I started the car, who else could it be? I didn't stop for nearly 400 miles. I was little more than an hour away when I had to get gas again, and by then it was nearly dark. While standing at the pump, I looked at the rich shadow of the Black Hills poke up from a desolate prairie in the distance. Somewhere in there were the people who promised my parents my soul was Satan's. As I hung the nozzle, I noticed a car had pulled to the shoulder about a quarter mile down the interstate. I had been watching my rearview mirror closely after witnessing the accident, and there was a couple of times that I thought I was being followed again, but it didn't matter much. If it was Sharon, she knew where I was headed anyway. Soon I was ascending the hills, weaving through dark roads lined with ponderosa pines, my heartbeat steadily rising along with the slight altitude. Why had I agreed to come here? For all I knew, I was the last piece of their puzzle to sacrifice. I passed the black shadow of the lake and jumped as my GPS said I arrived. I kept my eyes peeled for the logging road. The little leather book said it was the first right after the lake, and far too soon I was there. I rolled to a stop and sat in the car in the dark. I thought about turning around, but the moment I did, towards the end of the road, I saw the soft orange glow of flames. The road proved to be too rugged for my rental, and I pulled to the side and continued on foot. The lights were further ahead than they first appeared, but after a few hundred feet, I could see what they illuminated. 5 nooses hung from the branch of a pine. The torches that lit the scene were not tiki, but crudely made of iron. As I got closer, I couldn't see anyone. There were just nooses gently swinging in the wind. "Hello?" I called, and 2 young women in white dresses stepped from behind the pine. My stepsisters of a sort. They didn't look at me immediately. They took turns holding each other's hands as they stepped onto a stone that acted as a stool. Then they fixed 2 of the nooses around their necks. "What are you doing?" I spoke, but it came out as a horrified whisper.
"Welcome home, Samuel,"
they said in tandem and jumped off the short stone. The fall wasn't far enough to break their necks. At the height they'd hopped from, they'd just slowly suffocate. I started running to them. "What are you doing? No!" I raced to them, stumbling towards the tree, but when I got close, I saw their white dresses were both blotched red. I stared at them in horror as I watched blood trickle from their toes in thick streams. There were razors in the ropes. They were both smiling at me, their mouths black with blood. The life quickly leaving their eyes. "No," I whispered.
"Sam."
The voice came from my left, but I didn't need to know who it was. "You." I turned, and there they were. The people that raised me. The people that tricked my parents into killing themselves. "You demented freaks."
"Anger is natural now."
The man stepped forward. He was little changed from the last time I saw him. He had the same high forehead and soulless eyes, only with a little more wrinkles.
"We're here to give you everything."
The woman chimed in and smiled.
"We're here to give you the world."
"Do tell."
"Please."
The man gestured at my feet.
Don't stand there.
I looked down. I was standing in a shallow stone trough beneath the nooses that was quickly filling with blood. I took 2 full steps backwards into the grass.
Sharon told us you read the note your parents left you.
He pointed into the dark, and I realized at the edge of the firelight stood Sharon. I immediately looked down the road I had come in from and frowned. The thing I once thought was my mother began to speak.
You are a very special boy. On the night you were born, the star of Lucifer fell. Did you know it falls just once in a human lifetime?
She looked at me expectantly, as if this information alone would change my entire perspective.
Well, no matter. But that star fell on you. Our Lord had died the very day of your birth, but his soul wastes no time to return to Earth.
Are you wackos saying I'm Satan?
No, not yet. All you have to do is spill the blood of the one you loved, and then we shall baptize you.
They were smiling at their daughters proudly, and I began to feel sick. I pitied them. I looked at the hanging sisters, their faces already cold and dead, but their smiles just as wide. I did not love those girls.
Of course not. But the blood from one girl doesn't make for a good baptism.
Sharon started stepping forward, and I noticed there was something halfway hidden behind her. My heart leapt. Liz, it was my girlfriend, bound and gagged. Sharon hurled her forward where she fell on the grass lifelessly.
Don't worry, she's just drugged. It'll make it easier for you.
I took a lunging step towards Sharon and raised my fist, but suddenly I felt immensely weak and I stumbled instead.
This brings us to the second part. We had hoped you wouldn't end up so normal. This entire thing is much easier when you welcome him into your heart from the very beginning. But do you feel that?
I dropped to my knees.
That's your life, fading. The second those girls' blood entered the baptism bowl, he could feel how close he is to entering this world again. And now, there's no turning back. You can kill the woman you love and be given power and life so great and so eternal, your sorrow will be forgotten in an instant. If you don't, your life will simply drain until you're dead.
I groaned and fell on my side. A pulsing pain was running out of each of my ribs.
I know what you're thinking. You think there's no way you would kill this girl you love. No way you'd let this evil enter this earth. But the choice is only an illusion. It is not just death you face, but eternity.
I frowned and looked into the man's eyes.
If you deny him life, he will take you with him into the void, for time ad infinitum. You will wander alone, and in the darkness you will know madness previously unknown to man. Do you think there's a difference between 1 and 10 billion years of blackness? You'd have to let us know.
I turned away from him. Could this all be true? I tried to think if I could have been poisoned. I hadn't eaten all day. I bought a single bottle of water from a gas station and drank the whole thing just after opening it. And the way I felt, it was unholy.
You will kill the girl,
the man said with certainty.
We will help you raise her into her noose. Then we will don our own. You see,
he stepped towards me.
You would be the first fool to choose eternity.
Did they know? I winced in pain. Did the town know?
They were promised a great reward for keeping you safe.
Everyone knew?
Everyone, Sam. Even the children were told in song. And they shall all be your servants.
Suddenly, we both frowned as an engine roared in the near distance. I rolled so I could see the road. Coming out of the dark was the black shadow of a car with its lights on. It was violently pitching over the ruts, and in just a few seconds, it was only 50 feet from us. I had never seen the people I had previously known as my parents express such emotion. There were many things I could never picture them doing, and running was at the top of the list. They stood motionless like deer in the headlights as the car barreled into them. Their bodies slammed onto the hoods before slipping under and bouncing as they were hit again by the tires. Sharon, my girlfriend, and I had only been missed by a few feet. The car slid to a stop and the door flung open, and to my disbelief, I saw all 6'10" of Jack pounding across the grass and ducking under pine branches towards us. Sharon stepped in front of him, but before she could say a word, in one fluid motion, Jake drew his arm back as far as he could, formed a fist, and hurled it into her head. Jake had always been a gentle giant, and I was always morbidly curious as to what kind of damage those enormous fists could do. There was a crack like a branch breaking, and Sharon slapped to the earth motionless. Jake paused and put his hands in the air and stared at the girls drenched in blood, dangling from their nooses. I had already moved to undo Liz's bindings. Once they were off, I positioned her so she lay on her side. Her breathing was slight, but steady. I looked up at Jake with uncertainty.
I'm sorry.
He ran his hands over his face.
I'm sorry. I never told you, and I'm sorry. They threatened me, Sam. They said we'd all be rich when you came back.
He settled himself and breathed for a moment.
I knew you weren't the devil, but more importantly, I knew there was no way you'd ever want to be one if it were offered. Sheriff Caine.
He put his hands on his knees and breathed.
I watched you and him at my house. He was getting impatient. He was going to make sure you followed through here. Tonight.
That was you? Despite the strangeness, I managed to smile. You pit maneuvered the sheriff?
Did you see that? I obliterated him.
It hurt to keep smiling, and I looked down at Liz. Liz, are you there? I said. We have to get her to a hospital. I looked at the man and woman. They were lifeless in the grass.
Sam.
Jake's tone brought me back to earth. I followed his gaze. He was staring at the trough where the stones were now glowing. A scarlet light seeped from the earth. Some evil beneath growing more restless. Tell me none of it is true, I said breathlessly, but Jake didn't say anything. Tell me they're all just a crazy cult. Jake! He looked at me helplessly, and I closed my eyes to keep from crying. Even as I said it, I knew I could feel it, and then I saw it. Eternity. My mind's eyes started playing a picture as clear as a movie, wandering the darkness forever with the devil I had forsaken from entering this world. But I realized with horror I could still hang Liz. After all, I'd been neglected of love my entire life, lied to, and tricked. I barely had an ounce of happiness in my life, and now I didn't just face death, but unending suffering. I saw my life as Satan stretched out in front of me. I would be powerful. I would be alive, and whoever that thing was that would occupy my body would commit evil the likes of which the world has never seen. But it was all just a fleeting thought. I loved Liz, and as cold to me as it was, I still loved the world. It was the ones who worshiped this thing that made my life so horrible in the first place. Jake, I said, and he looked at me. Don't regret keeping this from me. Don't beat yourself up. You made the right decision in the end, and that's what matters, isn't it? He nodded.
Yeah.
He started tearing up.
You're the best friend I ever had, man.
It's okay. I spoke quietly and laid next to Liz. I guess I'm going to be the first fool, because in Liz's pupils, I saw the black pit of eternity, and I knew that into it I must walk.